Peter Parker sits alone in his cramped apartment, the dim light of a single lamp casting long shadows across the walls. In his trembling hands, he holds a faded photograph, its edges worn from years of being held just like this. The image shows Uncle Ben, smiling, unaware of what's coming. Unaware that in just a few short weeks his life would end in a dark alley, killed by a man his nephew could have stopped. Peter's voice breaks the silence, barely above a whisper. Every hero's story begins with a loss, but mine began with a choice I can never take back. The memory flashes unbidden. A wrestling ring, bright lights, the roar of a crowd. A thief running past him, desperate, clutching stolen money. The security guard's voice echoing, "Stop him!" And Peter, angry, bitter, hurt, making the choice that would haunt him forever. He stepped aside. He let the man run. He said those 3 words that would destroy his world. "Not my problem." 3 days later, Uncle Ben was dead, shot by that same thief. The man Peter let escape. The man he could have stopped with barely a thought, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Because to understand how Peter Parker became Spider-Man, to understand the weight he carries every single day, we need to go back. Back to where it all began. Back to Queens, New York, 1962, and a brilliant but desperately lonely teenager who had no idea that one bite from a dying spider would change not just his life, but the entire world. Peter Parker was 15 years old when his life split into before and after. He lived in a small house in Queens with his Aunt May and Uncle Ben, the 2 people who raised him after his parents died in a plane crash when he was just 6 years old. He barely remembered his mother's face, his father's voice. May and Ben were his world, his anchor, his family. But at Midtown High School, Peter was invisible, worse than invisible. He was the target. The skinny kid with glasses who got shoved into lockers. The science nerd who ate lunch alone in the library because sitting in the cafeteria meant enduring Flash Thompson's endless harassment. Flash, the football star, the popular kid, the one everyone loved. And his favorite punching bag was Peter Parker. "Hey, puny Parker!" Flash would shout across the hallway and the laughter would follow. Always the laughter. Peter learned to keep his head down, to disappear into his books, to find refuge in the one place where he truly excelled: science. Chemistry, physics, biology, Peter devoured it all. His teachers called him gifted. His classmates called him a freak. Both were right in their own way. But Peter had something none of them understood. A mind that could see patterns where others saw chaos. A brain that could solve problems others couldn't even comprehend. He spent hours in his makeshift laboratory in the basement, mixing chemicals, building small devices, losing himself in the pure logic of scientific discovery. Here, in this space, he wasn't the kid who got bullied. He was Peter Parker, scientist. Peter Parker, genius. Uncle Ben would come down sometimes, bringing him a sandwich, ruffling his hair. "Don't stay up too late, Pete." Even Einstein needed sleep. May would call down the stairs, worry in her voice. "Peter, honey, you need friends your own age, not just test tubes and equations." But they didn't understand. In the lab, Peter was safe. In the lab, no one could hurt him. Then came the Oscorp Science Exhibition, a field trip that Midtown High organized for the advanced science students. Peter was excited in a way he rarely allowed himself to be. Oscorp Industries was the pinnacle of scientific achievement, the place where the impossible became possible. Norman Osborn, the brilliant but ruthless CEO, had opened the doors to showcase their latest breakthroughs in genetics, radiation, and molecular biology. The students filed through the sterile white corridors, past laboratories filled with equipment Peter had only read about in journals. Flash Thompson was there, of course, making jokes, not paying attention, treating the whole thing like another opportunity to goof off. But Peter was transfixed. Every display, every explanation, every glimpse into cutting-edge research filled him with wonder. They entered a chamber where scientists were demonstrating the effects of radiation on genetic material. Behind reinforced glass, spiders had been exposed to specific wavelengths of radioactive energy. The researchers explained how radiation could trigger mutations, could rewrite DNA itself, could transform one thing into something entirely different. Peter pressed closer to the glass, his breath fogging the surface. The spiders inside moved with unusual coordination, their movements faster than normal, more precise. One particular spider caught his eye. It seemed agitated, throwing itself against the glass repeatedly, as if trying to escape. What Peter didn't see, what no one saw, was the hairline fracture in the containment chamber. A flaw in the glass so small it was invisible to the naked eye. But it was enough. The spider squeezed through the microscopic gap, It was dying, its body ravaged by the radioactive energy coursing through its cells. It had minutes, maybe seconds left. And in those final moments, driven by instinct or fate or pure random chance, it dropped from the ceiling onto Peter Parker's hand. The bite was sharp, sudden, shocking. Peter jerked his hand back with a gasp, seeing the small red mark on his skin, watching the spider fall to the floor and curl up dead. "You okay, Parker?" someone asked, but Peter barely heard them. His hand throbbed, his vision blurred. A wave of nausea swept through him, and for a moment he thought he might pass out right there in the Oscorp exhibition hall. "I'm fine," he muttered, cradling his hand. "Just a spider bite, I'm fine." He wasn't fine. Nothing would ever be fine again. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Peter stumbled through his remaining classes, his hand burning, his head pounding, strange sensations rippling through his body. By the time he got home, he could barely stand. He told Aunt May he had a fever, went straight to his room, and collapsed onto his bed. That night, Peter Parker's body was rewritten at the molecular level. The radioactive venom from the spider invaded his cells, spliced itself into his DNA, triggered mutations that should have killed him, but instead transformed him into something new. Something more, something other. He woke the next morning feeling strange, not sick, but different, fundamentally, impossibly different. His alarm clock shrieked beside his head, and Peter reached out to turn it off. His hand moved faster than he intended, and instead of pressing the button, his fingers crushed the entire clock, plastic and circuits crumbling like paper in his grip. Peter stared at his hand, at the broken pieces of the alarm clock, his mind refusing to process what just happened. He stood up too quickly, and his head slammed into the ceiling, cracking the plaster. He stumbled backward, and his hand stuck to the wall, actually stuck, like glue, and when he tried to pull away, a chunk of wallpaper came with him. "What is happening to me?" Peter whispered, his voice shaking. He ran to the bathroom, locked the door, and looked in the mirror. His reflection stared back, but different. His vision was perfect, crystal clear, better than it had ever been. He took off his glasses and could see every detail, every pore, every hair with impossible clarity. His body, always skinny and weak, now showed definition, muscle where there had been none. Peter lifted his hand and pressed it against the bathroom tile. When he pulled away, his hand stuck. He could feel the texture of the tile, could sense the microscopic grooves, could control his grip with perfect precision. He placed his foot against the wall and pushed. His body lifted off the ground. He was standing on the wall, vertical, defying gravity. He climbed to the ceiling and hung there, upside down, his heart racing, his mind screaming that this was impossible, that physics didn't work this way, that he was dreaming or dying or losing his mind. But he wasn't. This was real. The spider bite had done something to him, changed him, given him abilities that shouldn't exist. For 3 days, Peter experimented in secret. He discovered he could lift objects that weighed hundreds of pounds without straining. He could jump the length of a city block. He could stick to any surface, climb any wall, hang from any ceiling. His reflexes were superhuman. He could snatch flies out of the air without thinking. When someone threw something at him, his body moved before his brain registered the threat, dodging with impossible speed. And there was something else. A sixth sense. A tingling at the base of his skull that warned him of danger before it happened. Like his body could feel threats before they materialized. Peter didn't understand it, couldn't explain it, but it was there. Always there. A constant awareness of the world around him. But understanding his powers was one thing. Knowing what to do with them was something else entirely. Uncle Ben and Aunt May were struggling. Peter knew this even though they tried to hide it. The bills piling up on the kitchen table. The whispered conversations late at night about mortgage payments and medical expenses. May's arthritis was getting worse, and the medication was expensive. Ben's hours at the plant had been cut. They were drowning financially, and Peter, for all his genius, couldn't help them. Until now. Peter saw the advertisement in the newspaper. A wrestling promotion offering $3,000 to anyone who could last 3 minutes in the ring with their champion, Crusher Hogan. $3,000. That would solve everything. Pay the overdue bills, buy May's medication, give them breathing room, but Peter couldn't just walk into a wrestling ring as himself. Puny Parker would be destroyed in seconds. He needed a disguise, a mask. He went to a costume shop and bought a cheap red and blue ski mask, cut holes for the eyes. It was crude, ridiculous even, but it would hide his identity. That night, Peter Parker ceased to exist, and for the first time, Spiderman was born. Though he didn't call himself that yet. He was just a scared kid trying to help his family. The wrestling arena was loud, smoky, filled with people screaming for blood. Peter's heart hammered in his chest as he stepped into the ring, wearing his makeshift mask and ordinary clothes. The crowd booed. Crusher Hogan, a mountain of muscle and rage, laughed at him. "This is what they send me, a skinny kid in a mask." The bell rang, Hogan charged, and Peter moved. Everything Peter had discovered over the past 3 days came together in that moment. He dodged Hogan's attack without thinking, his spider sense guiding him. He leaped over the wrestler's head, stuck to the ropes, flipped and twisted with impossible agility. The crowd's boos turned to gasps, then to cheers. They had never seen anything like this. Hogan was strong, but Peter was stronger, faster, better. He didn't want to hurt the man just last 3 minutes, but his new strength was difficult to control. One punch sent Hogan crashing into the corner. The referee counted. The crowd roared. 3 minutes had passed in less than one. Peter had won. Backstage, Peter's hands shook as he approached the promoter's office. $3,000. He had actually done it. Aunt May and Uncle Ben would be safe. Everything would be okay. The promoter, a greasy man with a cigar, counted out a stack of bills. Peter's heart soared. Then the man stopped counting at $100. "Wait," Peter said, confused. "The advertisement said 3,000. The promoter shrugged. "That's gate receipts, kid. You get a percentage, $100. Take it or leave it." "But that's not fair. You promised 3,000. Sue me, kid. Now get out of my office." Peter stood there, rage building inside him. He had risked everything, exposed his powers, and for what? $100. It wasn't enough. It wasn't nearly enough. The promoter had cheated him, lied to him, treated him like he was nothing, just like everyone always had. Peter grabbed the money and stormed toward the exit, anger coursing through his veins. He was so focused on his fury, so consumed by the injustice of it all, that he almost didn't notice the commotion near the front entrance. A man sprinted past him, wild-eyed and desperate, clutching a bag of money. Behind him, a security guard was shouting, out of breath, unable to keep up. "Stop him! Somebody stop that guy!" The thief was heading straight for Peter. One move, that's all it would take. Peter could stop him without even trying. Grab him, web him up, hold him until the police arrived. It would be easy, but Peter stepped aside. He moved out of the thief's way and let him run past, let him escape into the night. The security guard stumbled up to Peter, gasping. "Why didn't you stop him? You could have stopped him." Peter's voice was cold, empty, poisoned by bitterness. "Not my problem." He walked away, clutching his $100, telling himself he did the right thing. The promoter cheated him. Why should Peter help him? Why should Peter help anyone? The world had never helped him. Uncle Ben always said, with great power comes great responsibility, but what had responsibility ever given Peter except pain and loneliness? No, Peter Parker was done being the victim, done being the good kid who got nothing in return. From now on, he would look out for himself. Peter had no idea that in 3 days, that decision would destroy his entire world, that the thief he let escape would take everything Peter loved, that the choice he made in anger and bitterness would forge him into the hero he was always meant to become. But for now, Peter Parker walked into the night, unaware that he had just set in motion the tragedy that would define the rest of his life. Hey guys, tonight we begin with the remarkable journey of a boy who became one of the greatest heroes the world has ever known. From a radioactive spider bite to battles across dimensions, Spider-Man's story is one of loss, responsibility, and unwavering determination to do what's right. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Get into your blanket, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. 3 days passed. 3 days of Peter Parker living in a bubble of denial, convincing himself that he made the right choice. He spent the $100 on things Aunt May and Uncle Ben needed. Small things, groceries, and a new sweater for May because winter was coming and her old one was falling apart. It wasn't the 3,000 he had hoped for, but it was something. It had to be enough. Peter told himself he was helping, told himself he was being responsible. But deep down, in a place he refused to examine, guilt gnawed at him like a living thing. The thief's face flashed through his mind at random moments. The security guard's accusation echoed in his thoughts. Why didn't you stop him? But Peter pushed it down, buried it deep, and tried to move on. On the third night, Peter was walking home from the library. The streets of Queens were quiet, the kind of peaceful that only comes in suburban neighborhoods where nothing bad is supposed to happen. Peter was thinking about his homework, about the new web shooter designs he had been sketching. about whether he should use his powers to make more money or keep them hidden forever. Then he turned onto his street and his entire world stopped. Police cars. 3 of them parked outside his house, their red and blue lights cutting through the darkness like knives. The lights painted the neighborhood in alternating colors, red then blue then red again, a rhythm that matched the sudden frantic beating of Peter's heart. No, 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 Peter ran. His enhanced speed carried him down the sidewalk faster than any normal person could move. But it still felt like he was moving through water, like time itself had slowed to torture him with every second of anticipation. Neighbors stood on their lawns, watching, whispering. Police officers moved in and out of his house. An ambulance was parked at the curb, but its lights were off. No sirens, no rush. That's when Peter knew. When you need an ambulance but there's no urgency, it means there's nothing left to save. Peter pushed through the gathered crowd, his voice breaking. "What happened? What's going on?" A police officer tried to stop him. "Son, you can't go in there right now." "I live here, that's my house. Where's my uncle? Where's Aunt May?" The officer's face softened, and that expression told Peter everything he needed to know even before the words came. "Son, I'm so sorry. There's been an incident. Your uncle, he was shot." The world tilted. Peter's knees buckled, and he would have fallen if the officer hadn't caught him. "What? No, no, he can't be. Where is he? I need to see him. The paramedics did everything they could, but the injuries were too severe. He didn't make it. I'm so sorry." Peter shoved past the officer and ran into the house. Aunt May sat on the couch, surrounded by police officers and neighbors, her face buried in her hands, her entire body shaking with sobs. When she saw Peter, she reached for him, and he collapsed beside her, and they held each other while the world crumbled around them. "What happened?" Peter managed to choke out. "How did this happen?" One of the detectives, a tired man with kind eyes, knelt in front of them. "Your uncle surprised a burglar. He was coming home from his evening walk when he saw someone breaking into a house down the street. He confronted the man and there was a struggle. The burglar shot him and fled. I'm very sorry for your loss." Peter's mind was screaming. This didn't make sense. Uncle Ben was careful, smart. He wouldn't confront a dangerous criminal, except he would. Because Uncle Ben believed in doing the right thing, in standing up when others wouldn't, in responsibility. "Did you catch him?" Peter asked, his voice hollow. "The man who did this, did you catch him?" The detective shook his head. "Not yet, but we have a description. White male, 30s, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. We've got units searching the area. He's trapped somewhere in the warehouse district near the old industrial park. We'll get him." Something in the detective's description triggered a memory in Peter's mind. The shape of the man, the way he moved. The desperate look in his eyes. No, it couldn't be. Peter stood abruptly, pulling away from Aunt May even as she reached for him. "Peter, where are you going?" "I need some air. I just need to think." He ran out of the house before anyone could stop him. The moment he was out of sight, Peter ducked into an alley and ripped off his jacket. Underneath, he wore the crude red and blue mask he had used at the wrestling match. It wasn't much of a costume, but it would hide his identity. Peter didn't think. He just moved. His powerful legs launched him into the air, and his hands found purchase on the brick wall of the building beside him. He climbed faster than any human could, reaching the roof in seconds. Then he was running, leaping from rooftop to rooftop, his spider sense guiding him, his rage driving him forward. The warehouse district was a maze of abandoned buildings and forgotten industrial spaces. Police searchlights swept through the darkness, officers calling to each other as they coordinated their search. But Peter didn't need lights. His enhanced senses could pick up things others couldn't. The faint sound of breathing, the smell of sweat and fear, the tiny vibrations of movement. There. An old textile warehouse, its windows broken, its doors hanging off their hinges. Peter's spider sense tingled at the base of his skull. Someone was inside. He dropped through a broken skylight, landing silently on the factory floor. Moonlight filtered through the shattered windows, casting long shadows across rusted machinery and rotting fabric. Peter moved like a ghost, each step perfectly silent, his senses extended, searching. "I know you're here," Peter called out, his voice echoing in the empty space. "There's no way out. The police have the building surrounded." A sound. The scrape of a shoe against concrete. Peter spun toward it, and there, emerging from behind a pile of old equipment, was the thief. The same man who had run past Peter 3 nights ago. The man Peter let escape. The thief held a gun, his hands shaking, his eyes wild. "Stay back, I'll shoot, I swear I'll shoot." Peter's vision narrowed. All the rage, all the guilt, all the pain of the last few hours focused on this one man. "You killed him." You killed Uncle Ben. I didn't mean to. He came at me and I panicked. It was an accident. An accident? Peter's voice rose, cracking with emotion. He was trying to stop you from robbing someone. He was trying to do the right thing. And you shot him. I'm sorry, okay? I didn't want this to happen. Peter advanced and the thief fired. The bullet left the gun in slow motion, or at least that's how it seemed to Peter. His spider sense screamed and his body moved on instinct. He twisted sideways and the bullet passed harmlessly by his head. He could feel the displacement of air as it flew past. Before the thief could fire again, Peter was on him. One hand knocked the gun away. The other grabbed the man by his jacket and slammed him against the wall hard enough to crack the concrete. "Do you know who you killed?" Peter shouted, his face inches from the thief's. "Do you even care? He was a good man, the best man. He raised me, he loved me, and you took him away." The thief was crying now, terrified, stammering apologies that meant nothing. Peter could end this right now. One squeeze, that's all it would take. His strength could crush this man like the alarm clock he had accidentally broken. It would be justice. It would be revenge. It would be so easy. Uncle Ben's voice echoed in Peter's memory. "With great power comes great responsibility." Peter's grip loosened. His hand trembled. The rage was still there, burning like acid in his chest, but something else was there too, something stronger, grief, understanding. The terrible, crushing weight of consequence. This was his fault, not the murder itself, but the fact that it happened at all. 3 nights ago, Peter had the power to stop this man. One move, 1 second of effort, that's all it would have taken. But Peter was angry, bitter, selfish. He let the thief escape and Uncle Ben paid the price. If Peter had acted, if he had used his powers to help instead of walking away, if he had been responsible, Uncle Ben would still be alive. The realization broke something inside Peter. He webbed the thief to the wall, binding him completely, then staggered backward. The man struggled against the webbing, but it held firm, stronger than steel. Police sirens wailed outside. They would find the thief, take him into custody, process him through the justice system. But justice didn't bring Uncle Ben back. Nothing would bring him back. Peter climbed to the roof and stood there as the police stormed the warehouse below. He watched them take the thief away, watched the lights of the patrol cars disappear into the night. And then he was alone, standing on a rooftop in Queens, wearing a cheap mask and ordinary clothes, with powers that could change the world and a guilt that would never leave him. The city stretched out before him, millions of people, each one someone's uncle, someone's aunt, someone's loved one. And in that moment, Peter Parker understood what he had to do, what he would spend the rest of his life doing. He couldn't bring Uncle Ben back. He couldn't undo his mistake, but he could make sure it never happened again. He could use his powers to help people, to save people, to stand between innocent lives and the darkness that threatened them. Not for glory or money or recognition, but because it was right, because he could. Because with great power came great responsibility. And Peter Parker, more than anyone, understood the cost of ignoring that responsibility. The funeral was 3 days later. Small, quiet, just family and a few close friends. Peter stood beside Aunt May, holding her hand as they lowered Uncle Ben into the ground. The guilt sat in his chest like a stone, and he knew it would never leave. Every day for the rest of his life, Peter would remember the thief running past him, the security guard's voice, his own cold response. "Not my problem." He would carry that weight forever. And maybe that was fitting. Maybe that was the price he had to pay. After the funeral, after the guests had left and Aunt May had cried herself to sleep, Peter went down to the basement. His makeshift laboratory felt different now, tainted by the memory of who he had been just a week ago. The boy who thought his powers were a gift for himself. The boy who didn't understand responsibility. That boy was gone. In his place stood someone new. Someone who understood that power without responsibility was just destruction waiting to happen. Peter began to design, not web shooters or gadgets or toys, but a costume, a real costume. Something that would hide his identity but also represent what he was trying to become. Red and blue like the mask he wore, but better, more complete, with a spider emblem on the chest because that's what gave him these powers. That's where this all began. It took him 2 weeks to finish, 2 weeks of sewing and designing and refining. The costume was simple but effective. A full body suit in red and blue with black web patterns across the fabric. Large white eyes on the mask to hide his own. The spider emblem prominent on his chest. It wasn't perfect, but it was his. Peter put on the costume and looked at himself in the mirror. He didn't see Peter Parker anymore. He saw something else, someone else, a symbol, a promise, a responsibility. He needed a name. something that would strike fear into criminals but give hope to victims, something that connected to his powers but also to his purpose. Spider-Man. That's what he would call himself. Spider-Man. That night, Spider-Man patrolled Queens for the first time. He stopped a mugging in an alley, saved a woman from a purse snatcher, prevented a robbery at a convenience store. Small things, simple things. But each one mattered. Each person he saved was someone who would go home to their family. Someone who wouldn't die alone on a sidewalk because Peter Parker was too selfish to act. The police didn't know what to make of him. Neither did the criminals. A man who could climb walls, who had superhuman strength, who seemed to sense danger before it happened. They called him a vigilante, a menace, a threat. But they didn't understand. Peter wasn't doing this for them. He was doing it because he had to. Because every time he saved someone, it was a small payment on a debt he could never fully repay. But being Spider-Man came with costs Peter hadn't anticipated. The physical toll was manageable. His enhanced body could handle the late nights, the injuries, the constant danger. But the secret was harder. Hiding his identity from Aunt May, who was already broken by grief. Lying to her about where he went at night, why he came home bruised and exhausted. She worried about him constantly, and Peter hated adding to her pain. But he couldn't tell her the truth. If she knew he was Spider-Man, if she knew the dangers he faced every night, it would destroy her. Money became a problem too. Aunt May's arthritis was getting worse, and medical bills piled up. The mortgage on the house was overdue. Uncle Ben's death meant they lost his income, and May's job at a local bakery wasn't enough to cover everything. Peter tried to help, took part-time jobs when he could, but being Spider-Man took time. Time he couldn't spend working. Time he couldn't spend earning money his family desperately needed. Then Peter had an idea. A terrible, ironic, perfect idea. The Daily Bugle, New York's biggest newspaper, was always writing stories about Spider-Man. Not positive stories. The publisher J. Jonah Jameson seemed to have a personal vendetta against the web-slinger. He called Spider-Man a menace, a criminal, a danger to society. Every front page was another attack, another condemnation. But those articles needed pictures, and Peter Parker had access to Spider-Man that no other photographer could match. Peter bought a cheap camera with the last of his money, set up a timer and webline system that would automatically take photos while he fought crime. The first batch of pictures was rough, but they showed Spider-Man in action. Dynamic, powerful, exactly what a newspaper would want. He walked into the Daily Bugle building, heart-pounding, carrying an envelope of photos. The office was chaos. Reporters shouting, editors arguing, phones ringing. And at the center of it all, in a glass office overlooking the newsroom, was J. Jonah Jameson. Cigar in mouth, mustache bristling, shouting at someone on the phone. Peter approached the editor's desk. "Excuse me. I have some photos of Spider-Man. I heard you buy those." The editor barely looked up. "Put them on the desk." Peter laid out the photos. Action shots of Spider-Man swinging between buildings, stopping criminals, saving people. They were amateur but compelling. The editor's eyes widened. "Where did you get these?" "I was in the right place at the right time," Peter said, which was technically true. The editor grabbed the photos and marched into Jameson's office. Peter watched through the glass as Jameson looked at the pictures, his expression shifting from skepticism to excitement. A moment later, the editor emerged. "Mr. Jameson wants to see you." Peter's stomach dropped. He walked into the lion's den, into the office of the man who spent every day calling Spider-Man a menace, and tried to look calm. Jameson jabbed his cigar at the photos on his desk. "These are good, real good. How'd you get them?" "I just follow Spider-Man around," Peter said. "Try to be where he is." "You got access to the wall crawler?" "Something like that." Jameson leaned back in his chair, studying Peter with sharp eyes. "I'll give you $50 per photo. Bring me more like these and we'll talk about a freelance position." $50 per photo. Peter had 6 photos in the envelope. That was $300. More money than he had made in months. "There's just one thing," Peter said carefully. "Why do you print such negative stories about Spider-Man? He's helping people." Jameson's face turned red. "Helping people. That masked menace is a vigilante. He takes the law into his own hands. He's unaccountable, dangerous, and probably a criminal himself. The people of New York need to know the truth about Spider-Man." Peter wanted to argue, wanted to defend himself, but he needed the money too desperately. So he nodded, took the cash, and left. The irony wasn't lost on him. He would spend his nights risking his life as Spider-Man, then sell photos of himself to a newspaper that vilified him. He would fund his heroism by contributing to the very propaganda that turned public opinion against him. It was absurd. It was necessary. It was his life now. Over the following weeks, Peter established a routine. School during the day, though his grades started to slip because he was always too tired to focus. Spider-Man patrols at night, stopping crimes, saving lives, building a reputation. Photos sold to the Bugle, funding his aunt's medical bills and keeping their house from foreclosure. Sleep became a luxury. Rest became a memory. Aunt May noticed the changes. Peter was distant, distracted, always exhausted. She asked if he was okay, and he lied. Told her he was fine, just stressed about school. The guilt of lying to her added to the guilt he already carried about Uncle Ben. But what choice did he have? The truth would hurt her more. At school, Peter remained invisible. Flash Thompson still bullied him, though Peter could have ended that with a single punch. But Spider-Man didn't use his powers for personal gain. Not anymore. So Peter endured the harassment, kept his head down, and tried to survive. The only bright spot was that being Spider-Man gave him purpose. Every person he saved, every criminal he stopped, every disaster he prevented was proof that Uncle Ben's death meant something. That the lesson Peter learned in blood and grief was making the world better. It didn't ease the guilt, but it gave him a reason to keep going. Spider-Man was becoming known throughout New York. Some feared him, some praised him. The police didn't know whether to arrest him or thank him. Criminals whispered about the wall crawler who appeared from nowhere, who couldn't be escaped or outrun. And Jonah Jameson's Daily Bugle continued its crusade, painting Spider-Man as a menace while unknowingly paying Peter Parker for the privilege. But Peter was learning hard truths about heroism. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't appreciated. It was painful, exhausting, thankless work that cost more than it gave. Every night he went out, he risked his life. Every time he saved someone, he knew there were others he couldn't reach. Every victory was temporary because crime never stopped, danger never rested, and responsibility never ended. And through it all, Peter carried the weight of his original sin. The moment he stepped aside. The moment he let the thief escape. The moment he chose selfishness over responsibility. That choice killed Uncle Ben. That choice created Spider-Man. And Peter would spend the rest of his life trying to balance those scales, knowing they could never truly be balanced. On a rooftop overlooking Queens, Spider-Man stood silently in the darkness. The city stretched out before him, millions of lights, millions of lives, each one precious, each one worth protecting. The weight of his responsibility pressed down on him like a physical force. But he had chosen this, chosen to bear it, chosen to be better than the boy who stepped aside, because Uncle Ben was right. With great power came great responsibility. And Peter Parker, for all his mistakes, for all his guilt, for all his pain, would honor that truth every single day for the rest of his life, even if it killed him. Peter Parker thought he understood what being Spider-Man meant. Stop muggers, prevent robberies, save people from accidents. Simple street-level heroism that made a difference in small, tangible ways. But the universe had other plans. Because power attracts power, and Spider-Man's emergence didn't go unnoticed. In the shadows of New York City, others were transforming too. Others with abilities, with ambitions, with reasons to test themselves against this new masked vigilante. Peter was about to learn that being a hero meant facing threats far beyond common criminals. The first was a man named Dmitry Smerdyakov, though the world would come to know him as the Chameleon. A master of disguise, a Soviet spy with skills honed behind the Iron Curtain, Dmitry possessed an almost supernatural ability to become anyone. His face was a canvas he could reshape, his voice a tool he could modulate to match any person he studied. He had been operating in New York for months, stealing secrets, infiltrating organizations, leaving no trace of his presence. But the Chameleon made a critical error. He committed a series of high-profile thefts while disguised as Spider-Man. Museum artifacts disappeared in the night, security footage showing the distinctive red and blue costume scaling walls and swinging away on webbing. Suddenly, the public's uncertain opinion of Spider-Man solidified into outright hostility. J. Jonah Jameson had a field day. His headlines screamed about the Spider-Menace, about masked criminals hiding behind hero personas, about the danger of vigilantes with no accountability. Peter felt the walls closing in. Police officers who once nodded at him in grudging respect now drew weapons when he appeared. Civilians he saved flinched away in fear. The city he was trying to protect viewed him as a threat, and he had no way to prove his innocence without revealing his identity. Tracking down the Chameleon became an obsession. Peter spent nights following leads, analyzing the thefts, trying to understand the pattern. His spider sense couldn't help him here because the chameleon wasn't a physical threat in the traditional sense. He was a ghost, a shadow, someone who could be anyone at any time. The breakthrough came when Peter realized the chameleon wasn't just stealing random artifacts. He was targeting specific items connected to international espionage, things that had intelligence value. This wasn't about money. It was about information. Peter staked out the next logical target, a secure facility housing classified documents, and waited. When Spider-Man appeared to break into the facility, Peter was ready. He confronted his doppelganger on the rooftop, and the fight that followed was surreal. The chameleon fought with trained precision, but he didn't have superhuman abilities. Once Peter got his hands on him, once he tore away the mask and revealed the face-changing apparatus underneath, the game was over. The chameleon was arrested, his spy network dismantled, and Spider-Man's name was partially cleared. But the damage lingered. Even with proof of his innocence, many still viewed Spider-Man with suspicion. Peter learned a harsh lesson that night. Being a hero wasn't just about stopping villains. It was about maintaining trust, about protecting a reputation that could be destroyed in moments but took forever to rebuild. And he learned that not all threats came from supervillains. Sometimes the greatest enemy was public perception itself. The second major threat came from above. Adrian Toomes had been a brilliant engineer and inventor, a man who dedicated his life to creating revolutionary technology. He designed an electromagnetic harness that could generate anti-gravitational fields, allowing human flight without the need for bulky equipment or traditional aircraft. It should have made him wealthy beyond imagination. Instead, his business partner embezzled the company funds and left Adrian with nothing. Decades of work stolen by corporate greed. The betrayal broke something in Adrian. At 63 years old, most men would have accepted defeat, retired quietly, faded into obscurity. But Adrian Toomes was not most men. He took his prototype harness, refined it, weaponized it. The electromagnetic fields didn't just allow flight anymore. They enhanced his physical strength, his speed, his reflexes. An elderly man became as dangerous as someone in their prime. He called himself the Vulture, and his first act of revenge was robbing the very company that had been stolen from him. But one theft led to another. The rush of flight, the power of taking what he wanted, the ability to strike from above where no one expected him became addictive. Adrian Toomes transformed from a victim of corporate corruption into a high-flying criminal who terrorized Manhattan from the skies. Spider-Man's first encounter with the Vulture was humbling. Peter was used to fighting on walls, on buildings, in environments where his wall crawling gave him an advantage. But the Vulture owned the air. He swooped down with talons extended, struck with devastating force, then soared away before Spider-Man could react. Peter's webs couldn't reach high enough, his jumps fell short, and his spider sense warned him too late when the attacks came from directly overhead. The Vulture nearly killed him that first night. Peter crash-landed on a rooftop, ribs bruised, costume torn, pride shattered. He realized he had been arrogant. Just because he had powers didn't mean he was invincible. Just because he could stick to walls didn't mean he could handle every threat. The Vulture exploited Peter's limitations perfectly, and Peter barely escaped with his life. But Spider-Man adapted. He always adapted. Peter spent days analyzing the Vulture's flight patterns, studying the electromagnetic harness from stolen police photos, understanding the technology's weaknesses. He modified his web shooters to shoot farther, created web nets that could entangle wings, developed tactics for aerial combat. When they fought again, Peter was ready. He lured the Vulture into a confined space between buildings where flight was impossible, where the harness became a liability instead of an advantage. The fight was brutal, but Peter won. Adrian Toomes was arrested, his harness confiscated, his reign of terror ended. Yet Peter felt no satisfaction in the victory, because the Vulture wasn't evil. He was a brilliant man who had been wronged, who chose vengeance over justice, who let bitterness poison his genius. Peter saw echoes of himself in Adrian Toomes. What if Peter had continued down the path he started on? What if the anger and selfishness that let the thief escape had grown instead of being redirected? Would Peter have become like the Vulture, using his powers for revenge instead of responsibility? The third villain made Peter question everything he thought he knew about good and evil. Dr. Otto Octavius was a nuclear physicist, a man whose brilliance rivaled Peter's own. He designed a set of 4 mechanical arms controlled by a neural interface, allowing him to safely handle radioactive materials during experiments. The arms were technological marvels, responding to Otto's thoughts with perfect precision, extending his reach and his capabilities beyond human limitation. Then came the accident. A radiation leak during a demonstration. The electromagnetic field generator failed. Otto's mechanical arms fused to his body at the neural and molecular level. The radiation altered his brain chemistry, damaged the inhibitor chip that prevented the arms from overwhelming his nervous system. When Otto woke up in the hospital, he was no longer just a man with mechanical arms. He was something new. The arms were part of him, integrated into his very being, and they whispered to him. Whispered about power, about recognition, about showing the world his genius. Dr. Octopus emerged from that hospital with a god complex and 4 supernaturally strong tentacles that could crush steel. He was faster than Spider-Man, stronger, and far more experienced in combat. Their first battle was in downtown Manhattan, and Otto dismantled Peter methodically. One tentacle grabbed Peter's leg and slammed him through a brick wall. Another caught his web mid-swing and used it to throw him into a parked car. The remaining 2 blocked every attack Peter attempted, predicting his moves with cold, calculated precision. Peter barely survived. He webbed a fire hydrant and used the spray to create a smokescreen, then fled while Dr. Octopus was temporarily blinded. But running felt like failure. Like he was that scared kid again, watching Uncle Ben's killer escape because he was too afraid to act. For days, Peter was haunted by the defeat. Aunt May noticed his bruises, his distant stare, his lack of appetite. She asked what was wrong, and Peter lied again. Said it was stress from school, from work, from life. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. He had met someone who was better than him, smarter, stronger, more experienced. Someone who could kill him if they met again. But Peter couldn't hide. Not when Dr. Octopus continued his crime spree, robbing banks, stealing technology, hurting innocent people to demonstrate his superiority. Spider-Man had to face him again, had to find a way to win against impossible odds. The second battle was different. Peter didn't rely on strength. He used his scientific knowledge to analyze Dr. Octopus's mechanical arms, to understand the neural interface, to find the weakness. During the fight, Peter didn't go for the arms. He went for Otto himself. One perfectly placed web to the face, blinding him. Another set of webs tangling his arms together so they couldn't move independently. Then Peter got close, dodging the thrashing tentacles, and delivered a punch that knocked Otto unconscious. The police took Dr. Octopus into custody, but Peter knew this wasn't over. Otto was too intelligent, too dangerous, too ambitious. He would escape eventually, and when he did, he would be even more prepared. This was the beginning of a rivalry that would define both their lives. The criminals kept coming. Flint Marko was a small-time crook who escaped from Rikers Island and stumbled onto a nuclear testing site on a beach. The experimental radiation fused his molecular structure with the sand beneath him, transforming him into a being of living silicon. He became the Sandman, able to shift his form at will, to become a giant made of sand or slip through the tiniest crack as individual grains. He couldn't be punched, couldn't be contained, couldn't be defeated through traditional means. Spider-Man had to learn to fight an enemy who was essentially liquid. Water became his weapon. Fire hydrants, rain, anything that could turn sand into mud, into something heavy and immobile. Their battles were exhausting, lengthy affairs where Peter had to outthink rather than overpower his opponent. Then came the tragedy that showed Peter the true cost of his vigilante life. Dr. Kurt Connors was a good man. A scientist, a professor, someone Peter looked up to and learned from. Kurt had lost his arm in combat during his military service, and he dedicated his life to regenerative medicine. His research focused on reptilian DNA and its ability to regrow lost limbs. Lizards could regenerate their tails. Why couldn't humans regenerate their arms? Kurt's experiments showed promise. He developed a serum that incorporated reptilian DNA into human cells. The theory was sound. The results in animal testing were encouraging, but Kurt was impatient. His wife Martha was struggling to support the family on one income. His son Billy missed having a father who could throw a baseball, who could hug him with both arms. So Kurt did what desperate men always do. He tested the serum on himself. The transformation was immediate and horrifying. His arm grew back, but it wasn't human. It was scaled, clawed, reptilian, and it didn't stop there. The reptilian DNA spread through his entire body. Kurt's human mind was overwhelmed by cold-blooded instinct. He became the lizard, a creature of pure predatory intelligence with superhuman strength and a complete lack of human empathy. When Peter confronted the lizard in the sewers beneath New York, he was facing his friend, his mentor, a man he respected and cared about. But the lizard didn't recognize Peter. It only saw prey. It attacked with savage efficiency, claws that could rend steel, a tail that could shatter concrete, jaws that could crush bone. Peter fought back, but every punch felt wrong. Every time he hurt the lizard, he was hurting Curt Connors. Every blow was against a man who was a victim of his own desperation. How could Peter stop the lizard without killing the man inside? The answer was science. Peter synthesized an antidote based on Kurt's research, dodging attacks while mixing chemicals in a makeshift laboratory he set up in an abandoned subway tunnel. When the serum was ready, Peter didn't inject it. He couldn't get close enough without being torn apart. Instead, he loaded it into his web shooters and coated the lizard with web fluid laced with the antidote. The transformation reversed slowly, painfully. Scales receded, the tail withered, the claws retracted. Curt Connors emerged, naked and confused, with his arm gone again. Peter wrapped him in his jacket and called for an ambulance anonymously. Later, when Peter visited Curt in the hospital as himself, as Peter Parker the student, Curt thanked him for his concern. He didn't remember anything about being the lizard. Didn't know that Spider-Man had saved his life and his humanity. Peter couldn't tell him, couldn't explain. Could only sit there and pretend everything was normal while carrying the knowledge of what his friend had become. That night changed Peter. He realized that not all villains were evil. Some were victims. Some were good people who made desperate choices. Some were suffering from conditions beyond their control. And Spider-Man's job wasn't just to stop them. It was to save them. From themselves, from their afflictions, from the darkness that threatened to consume them. More villains emerged from the shadows. Max Dillon, an electrical lineman struck by lightning while working on power lines. His body transformed into a living conductor who could absorb and project massive amounts of electricity. He called himself Electro, and his powers made him nearly untouchable. Every time Peter tried to punch him, electricity coursed through Spider-Man's body. Every web Peter shot was either disintegrated or used as a conductor to shock him. Fighting Electro meant fighting at range, using insulated webbing, turning off power to entire city blocks to weaken him. Quentin Beck was different from the others. He wasn't transformed by an accident or driven by tragedy. He was simply a failed special effects artist who saw Spider-Man as a path to fame. Beck used his Hollywood knowledge to create elaborate illusions, smoke and mirrors and holographic projections that made the impossible seem real. He called himself Mysterio, and his first act was to frame Spider-Man for crimes he didn't commit using sophisticated special effects that fooled cameras and eyewitnesses alike. Fighting Mysterio was psychological warfare. Peter couldn't trust his eyes, couldn't rely on his spider sense because there was no real danger, just illusions. Beck made Peter see things that weren't there, doubt things that were real, question his own sanity. In the end, Peter defeated him by trusting his other senses. Smell, touch, hearing. Mysterio could fake visuals, but he couldn't fake the complete sensory experience. Peter grabbed what looked like empty air and found Mysterio's real body hiding behind holographic projections. The tipping point came when Dr. Octopus escaped from prison and formed the Sinister Six. He united 5 of Spider-Man's greatest enemies. The Vulture, Electro, Mysterio, Sandman, and Kraven the Hunter, a big-game hunter who viewed Spider-Man as the ultimate prey. 6 villains, each one capable of defeating Spider-Man individually. Together, they should have been unstoppable. Otto's plan was brilliant in its simplicity. They wouldn't attack Spider-Man together. They would spread across the city, forcing him to fight them one at a time while exhausted, injured, and outnumbered in the larger strategic sense. Peter would have to defeat 6 supervillains in succession without rest, without backup, without hope. And he did it, through sheer determination, through tactical brilliance, through refusing to give up even when his body screamed for rest. Peter fought the Vulture in the air and won. Battled Electro in an abandoned power plant and won. Outsmarted Mysterio in a hall of mirrors and won. Restrained Sandman with chemical webbing and won. Survived Kraven's jungle warfare tactics in Central Park and won. And finally faced Dr. Octopus in a warehouse, both of them exhausted, both of them battered, and won. When it was over, when all 6 villains were webbed up and awaiting police custody, Peter collapsed. He had won the greatest victory of his career, but the cost was staggering. Broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, countless cuts and bruises. He could barely stand, could barely swing home. Aunt May found him passed out in his bedroom. still wearing the tattered remains of his costume under his clothes. She didn't say anything, just bandaged his wounds with trembling hands, tears streaming down her face. Peter knew she suspected the truth but was too terrified to confront it, too afraid of what the answer might be. As Peter drifted into unconscious sleep, one thought filled his mind. This was only the beginning. More villains would come, more threats would emerge, more battles would be fought, and every single time Spider-Man would have to be there, would have to stand between innocent people and the darkness. Because that's what heroes did. They showed up, they fought, they endured, even when it hurt, even when it cost everything, even when no one appreciated it. And Peter Parker, for all his flaws, for all his mistakes, for all his pain, was a hero, whether the world recognized it or not. The year was 1965, and Peter Parker had begun to believe he understood the patterns of his life. Villains emerged, Spider-Man stopped them, the city remained safe. It was exhausting, painful, lonely work, but it was predictable, manageable, something he could control through preparation and determination. Then the Green Goblin appeared, and everything Peter thought he knew shattered like glass. The first attack came without warning. Peter was swinging through Manhattan on a routine patrol when his spider sense exploded with alarm. He twisted in midair just as something screamed past his head, close enough that he felt the heat. A pumpkin-shaped bomb detonated against the building behind him, the explosion powerful enough to shatter windows and send chunks of concrete raining down onto the street below. Peter looked up and saw something out of a nightmare, a figure on a bat-shaped glider, cackling with manic glee. The costume was grotesque, a goblin mask with yellow eyes and a fixed grin that promised violence. Purple and green, colors that should have looked ridiculous but instead felt genuinely threatening. The figure threw another bomb, and Peter barely dodged, his heart racing with something he hadn't felt in months. Real fear. This wasn't like fighting the Vulture or Dr. Octopus. Those battles had rules, patterns, logical progressions. The Green Goblin fought with chaotic precision, laughing while he tried to kill Spider-Man, treating the entire confrontation like a game. His glider moved unpredictably, his bombs came from impossible angles, and beneath the madness was a sharp, calculating intelligence that anticipated Peter's moves before he made them. Their first battle ended in a stalemate. The Goblin retreated after nearly bringing down an entire building, disappearing into the night while Peter worked frantically to save the civilians trapped in the wreckage. But the Goblin's laughter echoed in Peter's mind long after the physical sound had faded. What disturbed Peter most was the personal nature of the attacks. Other villains fought Spider-Man because he interfered with their crimes or represented a challenge to their egos. The Green Goblin seemed to hate Spider-Man specifically, personally, as if this was about more than just hero versus villain. There was venom in his words, rage in his attacks, a desire not just to defeat Spider-Man but to utterly destroy him. Over the following weeks, the Goblin struck repeatedly. He attacked Peter during patrols, ambushed him at crime scenes, even showed up when Spider-Man was trying to help accident victims. It was as if the Goblin knew where Peter would be, could predict his movements, understood his psychology. Each encounter left Peter more injured, more exhausted, more convinced that this enemy was different from all the others. But Peter's personal life was changing too, offering brief respites from the nightmare of the Green Goblin. He had been accepted to Empire State University on a full science scholarship, a validation of the intelligence he had always possessed but rarely got to celebrate. The campus was enormous, filled with students who actually cared about learning, professors who recognized his potential. For the first time since Uncle Ben's death, Peter felt like he might have a future beyond Spider-Man. His roommate was Harry Osborn, the son of Norman Osborn, one of the wealthiest and most powerful industrialists in New York. Harry was rich, but he didn't flaunt it. He was genuinely kind, a little insecure, desperate for his father's approval in ways that made Peter uncomfortable. They became friends quickly, bonding over late-night study sessions and shared frustrations with impossible coursework. Through Harry, Peter met others. Flash Thompson, his high school tormentor, had also enrolled at ESU. But college Flash was different, more mature, less cruel. He even approached Peter once to apologize for years of bullying, admitting he had been dealing with his own problems and took them out on an easy target. Peter accepted the apology, though the memories still stung. Then there was Gwen Stacy. Brilliant, beautiful, with blonde hair and eyes that seemed to see right through whatever walls Peter tried to build. She was a science major like Peter, matching him equation for equation in their chemistry classes. They were assigned as lab partners, and Peter found himself falling for her in ways he didn't know were possible. She made him laugh, made him forget about Spider-Man for precious hours at a time, made him feel like Peter Parker might deserve happiness after all. Their relationship developed slowly, naturally. Study dates that turned into real dates. Conversations that stretched until dawn. Gwen knew Peter was hiding something, carrying some weight he wouldn't share, but she didn't push. She accepted him as he was, broken pieces and all. Peter wanted to tell her the truth, wanted to share the burden of being Spider-Man, to have one person in his life who knew everything. But he remembered what happened to Uncle Ben, remembered that his enemies targeted people he loved. Telling Gwen would put her in danger, and Peter would rather live with the loneliness than risk her life. Norman Osborn was a frequent presence in Peter's life, though always at a distance. He would visit Harry at the dorm occasionally, cold and critical, barely acknowledging Peter's existence. Norman was brilliant, everyone agreed on that. He had built Oscorp Industries from nothing into a technological empire. But there was something unstable about him, something that made Peter's spider sense tingle even though Norman had never threatened him. Peter noticed things. The way Norman's hands shook sometimes. The gaps in his memory, conversations he couldn't recall having. The personality shifts from charming businessman to rage-filled tyrant in seconds. Harry made excuses, said his father was under stress, that the company demanded everything from him. But Peter saw something deeper, something wrong. The pieces came together slowly. Norman Osborn had been obsessed with creating a performance-enhancing serum, something that would give soldiers superhuman abilities. The military had rejected his proposals, called them too dangerous, too unstable. But Norman didn't stop. He tested the serum on himself, believing his genius would allow him to control the effects. The serum worked. It enhanced Norman's strength, his intelligence, his reflexes. It made him more than human. But it also fractured his mind, split his personality into fragments. The Norman who built Oscorp, who loved his son, who occasionally showed Peter kindness, that Norman was still there. But sharing his body was something else. Something that put on a goblin mask and tried to kill Spider-Man. Peter didn't know this yet. He was too focused on surviving each encounter with the Green Goblin, too busy trying to balance college and heroism and a relationship with Gwen. But fate has a way of revealing truths at the worst possible moments. The confrontation came on a cold November night. The Green Goblin ambushed Spider-Man near the waterfront, their most brutal fight yet. The Goblin fought with desperation, throwing bombs with reckless abandon, driving his glider at Spider-Man like a battering ram. Peter fought back with everything he had, but he was tired, injured from earlier battles, his reflexes a fraction of a second slower than usual. A pumpkin bomb exploded too close. The concussive force threw Peter into a shipping container, denting the steel. His vision blurred, his spider sense screaming warnings he couldn't quite process. The Goblin dove at him, and Peter shot a web that tangled in the glider's turbines. The glider spun out of control, crashing into a pile of wooden crates. Peter staggered forward, ready to web up his enemy before he could escape again. The Goblin was lying in the wreckage, his mask knocked askew. Peter reached down to remove it completely, to finally see the face of his greatest enemy. What he saw made his heart stop. Norman Osborn, Harry's father. The brilliant industrialist who occasionally visited their dorm. The man who had shaken Peter's hand and called him a good influence on his son. Norman Osborn was the Green Goblin. Peter stood there, frozen in shock, his mind racing to comprehend the impossible. Norman was unconscious, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. The Goblin mask lay beside him, empty and lifeless. Without the mask, without the manic energy, Norman just looked like a middle-aged man who had been beaten and broken. Peter's hands trembled as he reached for his web shooters. He should restrain Norman, call the police, let justice take its course. But Harry's face flashed through his mind. His best friend, his roommate, the person who had welcomed Peter into his life without hesitation. If Peter turned in Norman, it would destroy Harry. His father would go to prison, probably for life. The Osborn name would be ruined. Harry's entire world would collapse. The choice was impossible. Let a dangerous criminal go free or destroy his best friend's life. Peter Parker or Spider-Man, personal loyalty or public responsibility. Before Peter could decide, Norman stirred. His eyes opened, confused and frightened. He looked at Peter, at the Spider-Man costume, and genuine fear crossed his face. "Please don't hurt me," Norman whispered, his voice nothing like the Goblin's manic cackle. "I don't know what happened. Where am I?" Peter realized Norman had no memory of being the Goblin. The personality split was complete. Norman Osborn and the Green Goblin were sharing the same body but didn't know about each other. When Norman was in control, he had no idea what the Goblin did. And presumably when the Goblin was in control, Norman's conscience and memories were suppressed. Peter made his choice. He helped Norman to his feet, told him there had been an attack by the Green Goblin, that Spider-Man had saved him. Norman believed it, thanked Spider-Man, and limped away into the night. Peter watched him go, knowing he had just made a decision that might come back to haunt him. He hid the Goblin equipment, buried the mask and glider where no one would find them. Then he went home, showered away the blood and smoke, and tried to convince himself he had done the right thing. Days passed. Norman seemed fine, back to his normal cold efficiency. Harry noticed his father was in a better mood, less stressed. Peter watched Norman carefully, looking for signs that the Goblin might return, but saw nothing. Maybe the blow to the head had cured him. Maybe the trauma of nearly dying had shocked his system back to normal. Maybe Peter's gamble had paid off. College life continued. Peter's relationship with Gwen deepened. They were falling in love, though neither had said the words yet. She met Aunt May, who adored her immediately. Peter felt happier than he had in years, as if maybe, just maybe, he could have both lives. Spider-Man and Peter Parker, hero and normal person. Then Mary Jane Watson entered his life like a force of nature. She was Harry's girlfriend, though their relationship seemed casual, undefined. Aunt May had been trying to set Peter up with Mary Jane for months, constantly talking about this wonderful girl next door. Peter had resisted, already interested in Gwen, not wanting complications. When they finally met at a party, Peter understood why Aunt May was so insistent. Mary Jane was stunning, yes, but it was more than that. She had an energy, a confidence, a way of seeing through people's defenses. Her first words to him were now legendary. "Face it, Tiger, you just hit the jackpot." But Peter was with Gwen, and Mary Jane was with Harry, and everyone stayed in their lanes. Yet Peter couldn't shake the feeling that Mary Jane saw him, really saw him, in ways others didn't. She watched him with knowing eyes, as if she could sense the secrets he carried. The fragile peace shattered when the Green Goblin returned. Norman's personality fracture wasn't healed, just dormant. And when the Goblin resurfaced, he was worse than before. More violent, more focused, more determined to destroy Spider-Man. Worse, the Goblin had been investigating. He had studied Spider-Man's patterns, his behaviors, his relationships. And with Norman Osborn's resources and intelligence backing the Goblin's madness, the combination was deadly. Peter came home one evening to find his room ransacked. Nothing stolen, but everything searched. Someone had been looking for something, and they had been thorough. His spider sense tingled with residual danger, warning him that whoever did this was a serious threat. Then the attacks became personal. The Goblin showed up at Empire State University, throwing bombs onto the campus. He attacked the Daily Bugle, nearly killing J. Jonah Jameson in Peter's presence. He sabotaged one of Aunt May's doctor appointments, planting a bomb in the hospital that Peter only found by accident. The message was clear. The Green Goblin knew Spider-Man's civilian life. He was probing, testing, getting closer to the truth. It was only a matter of time before he figured out that Spider-Man was Peter Parker. Peter tried to protect everyone. He spent more time as Spider-Man, less time with Gwen and Harry. He pushed people away, became distant and cold, hoping that would make them less appealing targets. But it only made things worse. Harry felt abandoned by his best friend. Gwen felt pushed away by the boy she loved. Aunt May worried about Peter's increasing isolation. And through it all, Norman Osborn remained friendly, kind, completely unaware that his alter ego was terrorizing the people around him. Peter had to smile and shake Norman's hand while knowing this man, this fractured mind, was trying to kill him and everyone he cared about. The situation couldn't last. Something had to break. Someone had to get hurt. Peter knew it with terrible certainty. The Green Goblin was escalating, getting bolder, taking bigger risks. And the target he was circling, the person he was most interested in, was Gwen Stacy. Because the Goblin had noticed how Spider-Man fought harder when Gwen was in danger. How Peter's reactions changed when she was threatened. The monster wearing Norman Osborn's face had identified the weakness, the pressure point that could break Spider-Man completely. Peter tried to warn Gwen without revealing his secret. Told her to be careful, to watch out for the Green Goblin, to call him if anything seemed wrong. She looked at him with those clear eyes and asked the question he couldn't answer. "Peter, what aren't you telling me? What are you so afraid of?" Everything he wanted to say. I'm afraid of losing you the way I lost Uncle Ben. I'm afraid my greatest enemy knows who I am. I'm afraid that loving you will get you killed. But he said nothing. Just kissed her forehead and made her promise to be safe. A promise that in the end wouldn't matter at all. Because the Green Goblin was already planning his masterpiece. The strike that would destroy Spider-Man's soul. And Gwen Stacy, brilliant and beautiful and completely innocent, was about to become the center of a tragedy that would haunt Peter Parker for the rest of his life. The pieces were all in place. The Goblin knew the truth. Peter knew the danger. And between them stood everyone Peter loved, unaware they were standing on the edge of a cliff. Waiting to fall, the bridge, that's what people would remember. The George Washington Bridge, stretching across the Hudson River, its steel cables cutting geometric patterns against the night sky. A beautiful piece of engineering that would forever be stained with tragedy. But before the bridge, before the fall, before everything fell apart, there was the discovery. Peter came home from class one afternoon to find Harry in their dorm room, staring at the wall with empty eyes. His best friend looked hollowed out, like someone had reached inside and removed something essential. Empty bottles of pills were scattered on Harry's desk. Not enough to kill him, but enough to show he was searching for escape from something unbearable. "Harry, what happened?" Peter moved toward him, but Harry flinched away. "My father." Harry's voice was flat, emotionless. "I found his secret, the lab hidden behind the bookshelf in his study, the goblin mask, the glider. Everything." Peter's blood turned to ice. Norman's secret was out, but not to the police, to his son, to the one person whose discovery would cause maximum damage. "He's the Green Goblin," Harry continued. "My father is a monster who terrorizes the city, and I spent my whole life trying to make him proud." He laughed, a broken sound that had no humor in it. "Turns out the only thing he's proud of is his ability to destroy things." Peter wanted to comfort him, to say something that would make this better. But what could he say? Harry was right. Norman was the Green Goblin, and Peter had known for months, had kept that secret, had protected Norman to spare Harry this exact pain. The irony was suffocating. "You need to tell the police," Peter said quietly. "He's my father." Harry looked at Peter with red-rimmed eyes. "Whatever he's done, he's still my father. I can't be the one who destroys him." Peter understood that paralysis. Hadn't he made the same choice months ago? Hadn't he let Norman go free for the exact same reason? But that decision had only delayed the inevitable. The Green Goblin wasn't gone. He was just waiting, planning, preparing for something bigger. That something came 2 days later. Peter was in the middle of a chemistry exam when his spider sense exploded. Not the usual tingle of warning, but a screaming alarm that made him drop his pencil. Something was catastrophically wrong. He looked out the window and saw smoke rising from across the city. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Come to the George Washington Bridge, Spider-Man. I have something that belongs to you." Peter didn't need to ask who sent it. He abandoned the exam, ran to the nearest empty room, and changed into his costume faster than he ever had before. His mind was racing. Who did the Goblin have? Aunt May? Harry? Mary Jane? The answer when he reached the bridge was somehow worse. Gwen Stacy was being held at the top of the bridge's tower, hundreds of feet above the water. The Green Goblin stood on his glider beside her, one hand gripping her arm, the other holding a pumpkin bomb. Gwen was conscious, terrified, but trying to stay calm. That was so like her. Even facing death, she refused to panic. "Spider-Man," the Goblin's voice carried across the distance, amplified by his mask. "So glad you could join us. I was just getting to know Miss Stacy here. Lovely girl, smart, brave. She really cares about you, you know. Kept asking me not to hurt the spider." Peter landed on one of the support cables, his heart hammering. "Let her go, Goblin. This is between you and me." "Oh, but that's where you're wrong." The Goblin's laughter was manic, unhinged. "You see, I've been thinking about our little rivalry, wondering why I hate you so much. And then I realized something wonderful. You're just like me, Spider-Man, hiding behind a mask, pretending to be something you're not. So I thought, why don't we reveal ourselves together?" The Goblin reached up and pulled off his mask. Norman Osborn's face was revealed, but it was twisted with an expression Norman would never wear. This was the Goblin wearing Norman's face, not Norman himself. "Now your turn, Spider-Man. Show the girl who you really are, or I drop her right now." Peter's mind raced. If he revealed his identity, everyone he loved would be in permanent danger. But if he didn't, Gwen would die, unless he could save her, unless he was fast enough. "No deal, Goblin." Norman's expression darkened. "Wrong answer." He released Gwen. She fell, plummeting toward the water hundreds of feet below. Peter didn't think, didn't calculate, just acted on pure instinct. He dove off the cable, shooting a web line even as gravity pulled him down. The web attached to the bridge, and Peter swung in a desperate arc toward Gwen's falling body. Time seemed to slow. Peter could see every detail with crystal clarity. Gwen's blonde hair streaming upward. Her eyes wide with fear but also trust. She believed Spider-Man would save her. She always believed in heroes. Peter shot another web, this one aimed at Gwen's ankle. The strand shot true, wrapped around her leg, and stuck. Peter anchored the web to the bridge and pulled, trying to arrest her fall. The web caught. Gwen's body jerked to a stop, suspended in midair. For one perfect moment, Peter thought he had done it, thought he had saved her. Then he saw the way her head hung at an impossible angle, the complete stillness of her body, the physics that his scientific mind understood even though his heart refused to accept it. The sudden stop, the whiplash, the breaking of cervical vertebrae. Gwen Stacy was dead before Peter could reach her. He pulled her up slowly, cradling her body as he landed on the bridge's roadway. Her eyes were open but unseeing. Her skin was already growing cold. The girl he loved, the person who made him believe Peter Parker deserved happiness, was gone. And the web that was supposed to save her had killed her instead. Tragic, isn't it? The Green Goblin descended on his glider, still wearing that twisted smile. The hero's web, the tool of salvation, and it snapped her neck like a twig. You killed her, Spider-Man. Your web, your responsibility, your fault. Something broke inside Peter. The part of him that showed mercy, that believed in redemption, that tried to save even his enemies. That part died with Gwen. What remained was pure rage, focused and terrible. Spider-Man launched himself at the Goblin with a scream of anguish. The fight that followed was brutal, primal, nothing like their previous encounters. Peter wasn't trying to capture Norman or stop the Goblin. He was trying to kill. Every punch carried lethal intent. Every web was meant to suffocate or strangle. He had abandoned heroism entirely, consumed by grief and fury. The Goblin fought back, but even his enhanced strength wasn't enough. Peter was beyond pain, beyond exhaustion, beyond anything except the need to destroy the thing that had taken Gwen from him. He beat Norman until the Goblin personality retreated, until Norman Osborn himself emerged, confused and terrified. "Please," Norman begged, blood streaming down his face. "Please, I don't know what's happening. Where's Harry? I need my son." Peter's fist was drawn back for another strike. But Norman's words penetrated the rage. Harry, his best friend who had already lost so much. If Peter killed Norman, it would destroy Harry completely. Gwen was already gone. Peter couldn't save her, but maybe he could save Harry from losing his father, even if that father was a monster. Peter lowered his fist, stepped back, let Norman live. The Green Goblin personality surged back into control, seeing Peter's mercy as weakness. Norman grabbed a remote control from his glider and activated its autopilot, sending it flying towards Spider-Man like a missile. The glider's nose was tipped with razor-sharp blades meant to impale. Peter's spider sense warned him. He jumped aside at the last second. The glider kept going, unable to stop, and Norman was standing directly in its path. He tried to dodge, but too late. The blades pierced through his abdomen, pinning him against the bridge's support structure. Norman looked down at the blades protruding from his body, then up at Peter. For a moment his expression was clear, lucid, free of both the Goblin's madness and Norman's cold ambition. Just a man facing death, understanding what he had become. "Tell Harry," Norman whispered, blood bubbling at his lips. "Tell him I'm sorry." Then Norman Osborn died, still impaled on his own weapon, killed by the very technology he had created. Peter stood there, surrounded by death, Gwen's body lying on the roadway, Norman's corpse pinned to the bridge. 2 people dead, and Peter couldn't save either of them. The police sirens were getting closer. Peter picked up Gwen's body gently, held her one last time, then laid her down carefully and disappeared into the night. He didn't go home. Couldn't face Aunt May, couldn't pretend to be okay. Instead, he found a rooftop and sat there as the sun rose, still wearing his costume, not caring who saw him. The mask felt suffocating, so he pulled it off and let the morning air hit his face. Peter Parker had lost before, lost his parents, lost Uncle Ben, lost his innocence. But this was different. This wasn't about failing to act. He had acted, he had tried to save Gwen, and his web, the tool he used to help people, had killed her instead. How could he be Spider-Man after that? How could he swing through the city knowing every web he shot might kill instead of save? The news broke an hour later. Gwen Stacy, brilliant science student, dead in a confrontation between Spider-Man and the Green Goblin. Norman Osborn, industrialist and philanthropist, also dead in the same incident. The Daily Bugle's headline screamed, "Spider-Man kills Osborn and Stacy." J. Jonah Jameson had finally gotten his wish. Spider-Man was officially a murderer. Peter attended both funerals. Gwen's was first, her father Captain George Stacy presiding over the service with barely contained rage. He had always suspected Peter knew something about Spider-Man, and now his daughter was dead. He didn't speak to Peter, didn't acknowledge his presence. The message was clear. Peter wasn't welcome here. Norman's funeral was larger, filled with business associates and politicians who praised his genius and his philanthropy. No one mentioned the Green Goblin. Harry had hidden his father's secret, cleaned out the hidden lab, destroyed the evidence. As far as the world knew, Norman Osborn was a hero who died trying to stop a madman. Harry stood at the graveside, dry-eyed and hollow. When he saw Peter, something dark flickered across his face. Not grief, not sympathy, something colder. "You were there," Harry said quietly, "when my father died. You took pictures of Spider-Man for the newspaper. You're always around when Spider-Man shows up." Peter's heart stopped. "Harry, I don't know what you're implying." "Spider-Man killed my father." Harry's voice was flat, emotionless. "And you profit from it. You make money selling pictures of the man who murdered him. That makes you complicit, Peter. That makes you guilty, too." "It wasn't like that. The Goblin—" "Don't." Harry held up a hand. "Don't make excuses. Don't try to justify it. I want you out of our dorm room by tomorrow. I never want to see you again." Peter lost his best friend that day. Lost the brother he had chosen, the family he had built. And he couldn't even defend himself because the truth would be worse. If Harry knew Peter was Spider-Man, if he knew Peter had fought his father multiple times, had discovered Norman's secret and kept it hidden, it would destroy what little remained of Harry's sanity. So Peter moved out, found a cheap apartment he could barely afford, stopped going to classes because sitting in the seats where he used to sit with Gwen was unbearable. His grades plummeted. His work at the Daily Bugle dried up because he couldn't bring himself to photograph Spider-Man anymore. For 3 weeks, Spider-Man didn't appear in New York. Crime rose, criminals grew bolder. The city that had always complained about the web-slinger now wondered where he had gone. But Peter couldn't put on the costume, couldn't swing through the streets, couldn't save people when he had failed to save the one person who mattered most. Aunt May tried to help. She came to his apartment, brought food he didn't eat, tried to talk to him about his grief. But Peter couldn't tell her the truth, couldn't explain that he was drowning in guilt that went deeper than just losing Gwen. He had failed as Spider-Man, failed as Peter Parker, failed at the one job Uncle Ben had given him. With great power comes great responsibility, but what did responsibility mean when your power killed the people you tried to save? Mary Jane Watson was the one who finally broke through. She showed up at his apartment one evening, let herself in when he didn't answer the door, and found Peter sitting in the dark, staring at nothing. "You look like death," she said, her usual confidence subdued but present. "When's the last time you ate?" "I'm fine, MJ, you should go." "Yeah, that's not happening." She sat down beside him, not touching, just present. "I know you loved her, Peter. I know this hurts, but disappearing won't bring her back. You don't understand. Then explain it to me." Peter looked at her, at this girl who had been on the periphery of his life, who was dating his former best friend, who had no obligation to care about his pain. And he saw something in her eyes, recognition, understanding. She knew. Somehow she had figured out his secret. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. Mary Jane smiled sadly. "Since high school. I lived next door, remember? I saw you climb out of your window wearing that costume more times than I can count. You're not as sneaky as you think, Tiger." The relief of someone knowing, truly knowing, was overwhelming. Peter started talking, and once he started, he couldn't stop. He told her everything. Uncle Ben, the spider bite, the responsibility he carried, the villains he faced, the choice he made to let Norman live, the web that killed Gwen. All of it poured out in a confession that lasted hours. Mary Jane listened without judgment, without horror, without the fear Peter expected. When he finally finished, she took his hand. "It wasn't your fault," she said firmly. "The Goblin killed Gwen. Not you, not your web, him. And if you give up now, if you let grief turn you into what he wanted, then he wins. Gwen dies for nothing, and Spider-Man dies with her. I can't do this anymore, MJ. I can't watch people die." "Yes, you can, because you're Peter Parker, and Peter Parker doesn't quit. He gets up. He keeps fighting, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts." She was right. Peter hated that she was right, but she was. Uncle Ben's lesson hadn't changed. With great power comes great responsibility, and Peter still had power, still had the ability to save people, even if he couldn't save everyone. That night, Spider-Man returned. Not the quipping, joking hero from before. This Spider-Man was darker, quieter, more intense. He fought criminals with a brutality that scared them. He took risks that would have terrified the old Peter. He was looking for punishment for pain, for something that would balance the scales of Gwen's death. But slowly, painfully, he began to heal. Mary Jane became his anchor, the person who knew everything and stayed anyway. They weren't dating, that would come later, but she was there. Present. Real. Reminding him that Peter Parker was more than just Spider-Man, and Spider-Man was more than just tragedy. Harry Osborn, meanwhile, was descending into darkness. He blamed Spider-Man for his father's death, spent his inheritance hunting for information about the web-slinger, consumed by a need for revenge that Peter understood all too well. Their friendship was dead, replaced by a hatred that would eventually lead Harry down the same path as his father. The city moved on. New villains emerged. New threats appeared. Spider-Man stopped them all with mechanical efficiency, but the joy was gone. The hope was gone. All that remained was responsibility, duty, the weight of Uncle Ben's words pushing Peter forward even when he wanted to stop. And on quiet nights, when the city was finally safe, Peter would swing past the George Washington Bridge. Would look at the spot where Gwen fell, where his web caught her, where everything changed. He never stopped there, never lingered. Just acknowledged the ghost and kept moving. Because that's what heroes did. They carried their dead with them and kept fighting anyway. They bore the weight of impossible choices and didn't break. They saved the world one person at a time, knowing they couldn't save everyone, but trying anyway. Peter Parker had learned the hardest lesson heroism could teach. Sometimes your best isn't good enough. Sometimes people die despite everything you do. Sometimes the web doesn't hold and the fall breaks more than just bones. But you get up anyway, you put on the mask, you swing into danger. Because responsibility doesn't end with tragedy. It begins there. And Spider-Man, for all his flaws, for all his guilt, for all his grief, was nothing if not responsible. Even when it killed him inside. Even when the cost was everything. Even when the person who paid the price was the one who deserved to live most. The web had failed once. Peter would spend the rest of his life making sure it never failed again. 5 years passed. 5 years of Peter Parker fighting through grief, rebuilding his life piece by fragile piece, learning to function as both man and hero despite the weight he carried. He and Mary Jane had grown closer, their friendship evolving into something deeper. She understood him in ways no one else could, knew his secret, accepted his burden. They married quietly, just a small ceremony with Aunt May and a few close friends. No elaborate celebration, no public announcement. Just two broken people choosing to be broken together. Peter had even managed a kind of peace with his past. He visited Gwen's grave regularly, spoke to her in whispers about his life, about Mary Jane, about the responsibility he still carried. He knew she would have understood, would have wanted him to move forward. The guilt never left, but it became manageable, a scar instead of an open wound. Then Ben Reilly walked into Peter's life, and everything he thought he knew about himself shattered. It started with reports of another Spider-Man. Different costume, slightly different fighting style, but unmistakably similar powers. At first, Peter thought it was someone copying him, maybe a fan or a criminal trying to frame him. But when they finally met face to face on a rooftop in Brooklyn, Peter saw something that made his blood run cold. The other Spider-Man removed his mask, and Peter was looking at his own face. Not similar, not close, identical. Same features, same build, same eyes, like looking in a mirror that moved independently. "My name is Ben Reilly," the stranger said, "and I'm your clone." The story Ben told was impossible, insane, too bizarre to believe. Years ago, when Peter was still in college, a professor named Miles Warren had been obsessed with Gwen Stacy. Warren was brilliant but unstable, his admiration for Gwen crossing the line into dangerous fixation. When Gwen died, something in Warren broke completely. He became the Jackal, using his expertise in genetics to clone both Gwen and Peter, trying to recreate what he had lost. Peter remembered fighting the Jackal, remembered the confusion of facing someone who looked exactly like him. At the time, he thought both clones had died in an explosion. Apparently, he was wrong. Ben Reilly had survived, had crawled from the wreckage, and had spent the last 5 years wandering America, trying to understand what he was. "I have all your memories," Ben explained. "Everything up until the moment Warren created me. Uncle Ben's death, Gwen's fall, all of it. These aren't implanted memories. They're real. I remember living them." Peter's scientific mind struggled with the implications. If Ben had all of Peter's memories, if he believed he was the original Peter Parker, then how could Peter be sure he wasn't the clone? Clones could have false memories implanted, could believe themselves to be the original. The only way to know for certain was through genetic testing, and the technology in 1994 wasn't sophisticated enough to definitively prove which of them came first. They went to a lab, drew blood, ran every test available. The results were inconclusive. Both showed signs of being clones. Both showed signs of being the original. The spider powers made normal genetic testing useless because Peter's DNA had been altered by radiation. There was no baseline to compare against. For weeks, Peter and Ben existed in a strange limbo. Ben took on the identity of the Scarlet Spider, wearing a red hoodie over a modified costume, trying to be a hero without stepping on Peter's territory. They worked together sometimes, two Spider-Men protecting New York, and it should have been comforting. Instead, it was deeply unsettling. Because Ben Reilly wasn't just a clone. He was Peter Parker without the weight, without the years of grief and guilt and endless responsibility. He was what Peter could have been if Gwen had never died, if Norman had never returned, if the darkness had never consumed him. Ben was lighter, more optimistic, quicker to joke and smile. He was the Peter from before the bridge. Mary Jane noticed the difference too. She never said anything, but Peter caught her looking at Ben with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not attraction, exactly, more like nostalgia. Like she was seeing the boy Peter used to be before tragedy aged him beyond his years. Then came the revelation that destroyed everything. A new series of tests, more sophisticated than before, conducted by a geneticist named Seward Trainer. The results were definitive, or so they claimed. Peter Parker was the clone. Ben Reilly was the original. Peter sat in the lab, staring at the test results, his entire world collapsing. Everything he was, everything he had built was based on a lie. He wasn't Peter Parker. He was a copy, a genetic duplicate created in a laboratory. His memories weren't real. His relationship with Aunt May wasn't real. His marriage to Mary Jane was based on a false identity. "No," Peter whispered. "That's impossible. I'm real. I'm Peter Parker." "You have all of Peter Parker's memories," Trainer said gently. "That makes you feel real, but the genetic markers don't lie. Ben Reilly's cellular structure shows natural aging. Yours shows the accelerated cellular degradation consistent with cloning technology from that era." Ben looked devastated, guilty, as if he wished the results had been different. "Peter, this doesn't change anything. You're still you. The life you've lived, the choices you've made, those are real." But it did change everything. If Peter was the clone, then who was he? What right did he have to Aunt May's love, to Mary Jane's commitment, to the legacy of Spider-Man? Ben Reilly was the original, which meant Ben was the real Peter Parker. Which meant the man everyone called Peter was just a copy, a mistake, someone who should have died in that explosion years ago. Mary Jane held Peter that night as he fell apart. "I don't care what the tests say," she told him fiercely. "You're my husband. You're the man I chose. Clone or not, you're real to me." But even her support couldn't stop the questions that consumed Peter. He looked at his hands, the same hands that had failed to save Gwen, and wondered if they were even his hands. He thought about Uncle Ben's lessons, about responsibility and power, and wondered if those lessons applied to a clone or just to the original. The decision Peter made next was the hardest of his life. He gave up being Spider-Man. If Ben Reilly was the original Peter Parker, then Ben deserved the costume, the responsibility, the legacy. Peter couldn't keep pretending to be someone he wasn't. Ben tried to refuse, said Peter had earned the right to be Spider-Man through years of service. But Peter was firm. He passed the web shooters to Ben, handed over the costume, walked away from the only purpose that had kept him going since Uncle Ben's death. For the first time since he was 15 years old, Peter Parker wasn't Spider-Man. He was just Peter. Or rather, he was just a clone who thought he was Peter. The distinction was destroying him. Mary Jane was pregnant. That should have been cause for celebration, the next chapter in their lives. Instead, it felt like another lie. Was the baby even his? Or was it just the clone's genetic material, a copy of a copy? Peter couldn't voice these thoughts out loud, couldn't admit how deeply the identity crisis had wounded him. But Mary Jane saw it anyway, saw him pulling away, saw the light dying in his eyes. Ben Reilly, meanwhile, took on the role of Spider-Man with energy and enthusiasm. He modified the costume, made it sleeker, more armored. He was good at the job, maybe even better than Peter had been. He didn't carry the same psychological weight, didn't second-guess every decision, didn't see Gwen's face every time he shot a web. Ben Reilly was Spider-Man unburdened, and New York responded positively. But Peter couldn't stop watching, couldn't stop tracking Ben's activities, analyzing his methods, critiquing his choices. Because even if Peter was the clone, even if he had no right to the identity, being Spider-Man wasn't something you could just turn off. The responsibility didn't care about genetic testing. It existed regardless of who was original and who was copy. The villains, of course, couldn't resist the chaos. Dr. Octopus, the Vulture, even minor criminals saw the uncertainty around Spider-Man's identity as an opportunity. They attacked more boldly, tested Ben Reilly in ways they never would have tested the experienced Peter. Some fights went well, others nearly got Ben killed. And each time Ben struggled, Peter felt the pull, felt the responsibility screaming at him to put on the costume to help to be Spider-Man again. But he resisted. He had given up that right. He was the clone. This wasn't his life to live anymore. The psychological toll was immense. Peter stopped sleeping properly, haunted by dreams where he was dissolving into nothing, his body breaking down the way clones supposedly did. He pushed away his friends, couldn't face Aunt May because how could he tell her the nephew she raised was actually a genetic copy? He even grew distant from Mary Jane, despite her constant support, because he couldn't shake the feeling that he was deceiving her every day he pretended to be real. Then everything changed again. The Green Goblin returned. Not Norman Osborn, who was still dead, but someone wearing Norman's costume and using his technology. This new goblin knew things, understood secrets that should have been buried with Norman. And he was hunting both Peter and Ben, targeting them with a precision that suggested intimate knowledge of their lives. The new goblin attacked Ben Reilly during a patrol, nearly killing him. Peter heard about it on the news and ran to the hospital where Ben was recovering. They sat together, two men who shared the same face, the same memories, the same fundamental identity, and talked honestly for the first time since the test results. "I can't do this alone," Ben admitted. "I thought I could, thought being Spider-Man was about powers and responsibility, but it's more than that. It's about experience, about knowing how to handle the weight. You've been carrying this burden for years, Peter. I've had it for months. I'm not ready." "You're the original," Peter said quietly. "You're the real Peter Parker. This is your responsibility." "Is it?" Ben looked at him intensely. "Because I don't feel like the original. I feel like a copy of who you used to be. You've lived this life, made these choices, earned this identity. The tests might say I'm the original, but you're the real Peter Parker." "Not me." Before Peter could respond, the Green Goblin attacked the hospital. He crashed through the window on his glider, laughing with that familiar manic intensity, throwing pumpkin bombs that exploded in orange fire. Peter's spider sense screamed, and instinct took over. He pushed Ben out of the way, dodged the goblin's attack, fought back with years of trained reflexes. The battle spilled out of the hospital and across the city. Ben joined once he recovered, and together they faced the goblin. Two Spider-Men against one villain, and it should have been an easy fight. But the goblin was ready for them, anticipated their moves, played them against each other. In the chaos of the battle on a rooftop overlooking Times Square, the Green Goblin finally revealed himself. He removed his mask, and Peter felt his world invert again. It was Norman Osborn. Impossibly, inexplicably, Norman was alive. "Surprised, Peter?" Norman's grin was savage. "I've been dead for years, watching from the shadows, orchestrating everything. The clone saga, the genetic tests, Seward Trainer working for me, all of it. I wanted to break you, Peter, wanted to destroy your identity, your purpose, your will to fight. And it worked beautifully." "The tests," Peter breathed. "They were fake. Oh, completely fake. Seward falsified everything. You were always the original, Peter. Ben Reilly was always the clone. I just convinced you otherwise and watched you fall apart. Watched you give up being Spider-Man, watched you question everything about yourself. It was poetic, really, the perfect revenge." The revelation should have brought relief. Peter was the original. He was really Peter Parker. His life, his memories, his identity, all of it was real. But all he felt was rage. Rage at Norman for the manipulation, rage at himself for believing it, rage at the months of psychological torture he had endured for nothing. Norman attacked again, and this time there was no holding back. Peter and Ben fought together with lethal intent. They had both been victims of Norman's games, both suffered because of his obsessive need to destroy Spider-Man. This ended now one way or another. The fight was brutal. Norman's enhanced strength from the Goblin formula matched their spider powers. His experience and ruthlessness gave him an edge. But there were two of them, and they fought with synchronized precision, anticipating each other's moves because they shared the same combat instincts, the same training, the same fundamental way of thinking. Norman threw a bomb at Ben. Peter webbed it midair and threw it back. Norman tried to impale Peter with his glider. Ben tackled him off the platform. They traded blows, dodged attacks, covered each other's weaknesses. For the first time since learning about the cloning, Peter and Ben functioned as a perfect team. Norman realized he was losing. In a last desperate move, he tried to kill them both with a chain of pumpkin bombs that would bring down the entire building. Ben saw it first, saw the placement of the explosives, understood the blast radius. There wasn't time to disarm them. There was only time for one person to get clear. Ben looked at Peter, and in that moment everything was said without words. Ben knew he was the clone, had always known deep down despite the false test results. The memories he carried were copies, experiences he had never actually lived. Peter was the original, the real Peter Parker, the one who had earned this identity through years of suffering and sacrifice. "Thank you for letting me be Spider-Man," Ben said. Then he threw himself at Norman and the bombs, webbing them together, carrying them away from Peter and toward the edge of the building. The explosion lit up the night sky. Peter screamed, reached for Ben, but it was too late. The blast consumed them both, Norman and Ben, the Goblin and the Scarlet Spider, locked together in fire. When the smoke cleared, Peter found Ben's body in the rubble. Norman was there too, survived again somehow, crawling away into the darkness. But Peter couldn't focus on Norman. All he could see was Ben Riley was dying, his body disintegrating. It was proof, final and undeniable, that he had always been the clone. Clones broke down when they died, their unstable cellular structure collapsing. Ben's body was turning to ash in Peter's arms. "I'm glad it was me," Ben whispered, his voice fading. "I got to be Peter Parker for a while, got to be Spider-Man. That's more than a clone could ask for." "You were my brother," Peter said, tears streaming down his face. "Clone or not, you were real, you mattered. So did you? Don't forget that. You're Peter Parker, the real one, the only one. Don't let Norman take that from you again." Then Ben Riley died and his body dissolved completely, leaving nothing but ash and the faint smell of ozone. Peter knelt there in the ruins, holding nothing, mourning a brother he had only known for months, but who had shared his entire life. The clone saga was over. The truth was revealed. Peter Parker was the original, had always been the original. But the cost of that certainty was incalculable. He had given up months of his life to doubt and despair. He had pushed away the people he loved. And worst of all, he had watched his clone, his brother, his other self, die to save him. Peter returned home to Mary Jane, who was waiting with red-rimmed eyes. She had been watching the news, had seen the explosion, had feared the worst. When Peter walked through the door, she ran to him and they held each other like drowning people clinging to a life raft. "I'm the real Peter Parker," he told her. "The tests were fake. Norman orchestrated everything." "I know," she said. "I always knew. I told you it doesn't matter. You're real to me regardless of what any test says." But it did matter. Because for months, Peter had believed he was a clone, had given up his identity, had questioned every aspect of his existence. That kind of psychological damage didn't heal just because the truth was revealed. The scars remained, deep and permanent, and there was more trauma coming. Mary Jane's pregnancy, the hope they had clung to during the darkest days, ended in tragedy. She went into labor early, too early. The baby was stillborn, a daughter they would never get to know. Or depending on which version of events was true, the baby was stolen by Norman Osborn's agents, replaced with a false body, taken somewhere they would never find her. The uncertainty was its own special kind of torture. Peter and Mary Jane mourned together, two people who had lost too much, who were running out of strength to keep fighting. Their marriage survived, but it was damaged, strained by grief and exhaustion and the constant weight of Spider-Man's responsibilities. Peter reclaimed the costume, became Spider-Man again, but he was different now. Harder, more cynical, less willing to trust, less open to hope. The clone saga had taught him that nothing was certain, that identity itself could be questioned, that even your own mind and memories could be weaponized against you. He looked at his reflection sometimes and wondered who was looking back. The original Peter Parker, a man who had been broken and rebuilt so many times that the original was unrecognizable. Someone who carried the memories of Ben Riley too, because they had been the same person in different bodies, and watching your clone die felt like dying yourself. The questions had no answers. Peter just kept moving forward because that's what he did. That's what Spider-Man did. You carried the weight, you bore the responsibility, you saved people even when you couldn't save yourself. But on quiet nights, when the city was finally safe, Peter thought about Ben Reilly, about the brother who had been and wasn't, about the clone who had been more human than most originals, about the sacrifice that proved being real had nothing to do with genetics and everything to do with choice. Ben Reilly chose to be a hero, chose to save Peter, chose to die so the original could live. And that choice, more than any test or any genetic marker, proved he had been real after all. Just like Peter was real. Just like anyone who chose responsibility over comfort, sacrifice over safety, heroism over ease was real. The clone saga ended, but its echoes would haunt Peter Parker for the rest of his life. Some wounds never fully heal. Some questions never get answered. Some losses leave gaps that nothing can fill. But Spider-Man kept swinging, kept fighting, kept being responsible, because that's what heroes did, even when being a hero cost everything they had and more than they could afford to lose. The web held, barely, but it held. The year was 2007, and Peter Parker had survived more than most people could imagine. He had buried loved ones, fought monsters, questioned his own existence, and somehow kept going. His marriage to Mary Jane had weathered storms that would have destroyed most relationships. They had learned to exist in the space between hope and despair, building a life from whatever pieces remained after each catastrophe. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And for a while, that was enough. Then came Civil War, and everything Peter had carefully built came crashing down. Tony Stark, Iron Man, had proposed the Superhuman Registration Act. Every person with powers would be required to register with the government, reveal their secret identities, become official agents of the state. It was framed as accountability, as responsibility, as the logical evolution of superheroism. Tony believed it completely, argued for it passionately, convinced it was the only way forward. Peter saw merit in both sides. Registration meant oversight, meant heroes couldn't operate in shadows. But it also meant government control, meant politicians deciding who could be a hero, meant secret identities becoming public knowledge. For someone like Tony Stark, who had no secret identity, registration was simple. For someone like Peter Parker, whose loved ones had been targeted repeatedly because of his connection to Spider-Man, it was potentially catastrophic. Tony recruited Peter to his side, asked him to be the face of registration. "You're perfect," Tony said. "A real person with a real life choosing to step into the light. If Spider-Man unmasks, others will follow. You'll make history, Peter." Peter hesitated. Discussed it with Mary Jane, who looked terrified but said she would support whatever he chose. Talked to Aunt May, who didn't know he was Spider-Man but sensed his turmoil and told him to do what he thought was right. And Peter, exhausted from years of living two lives, from constantly lying to everyone, from bearing the weight alone, made a choice. He held a press conference, stood in front of cameras broadcasting to the world, and removed his mask. "My name is Peter Parker," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "And I've been Spider-Man since I was 15 years old." The world exploded. Peter's face was on every television, every newspaper, every website. Peter Parker, the freelance photographer who had been selling Spider-Man pictures for years, was Spider-Man. The irony was noted by every media outlet. J. Jonah Jameson's reaction was televised, his face turning purple with rage as he realized he had been funding Spider-Man's activities for over a decade. The immediate consequences were manageable. Peter had prepared for them. He moved Mary Jane and Aunt May to a secure location, accepted protection from Tony Stark's resources, tried to adapt to life without a secret identity. But he hadn't prepared for the psychological impact. Walking down the street and having people recognize him. Seeing his face used in political cartoons, in attack ads, in endless debates about registration. He couldn't be Peter Parker anymore, not really. He was Spider-Man all the time, every moment, no separation between the mask and the man. The weight that had been divided between two identities now crushed the single identity that remained. Worse were the attacks on his loved ones. Criminals who had been defeated by Spider-Man now knew where to find revenge. They couldn't hurt Peter directly, his powers protected him. But Aunt May, Mary Jane, they were vulnerable in ways Peter had always feared. The kingpin, Wilson Fisk, was in prison but still controlled vast criminal networks. He had been humiliated by Spider-Man repeatedly over the years, and now he saw an opportunity for revenge. Fisk put out a contract on Peter's family. Not on Peter himself, that would be too easy, on the people Peter loved. Make him watch them suffer. Make him live with the consequences of revealing his identity. Peter tried to protect them. moved them constantly, hired security, used every resource Tony Stark offered. But you can't protect someone every second of every day. Eventually, inevitably, the defenses would fail. The assassin's bullet was meant for Mary Jane. She was walking into their apartment building, carrying groceries, thinking about what to make for dinner. The sniper was positioned 3 blocks away, using military-grade equipment, a professional killer following Kingpin's orders. Peter's spider sense warned him. He was across the city but felt the danger, felt Mary Jane's life hanging by a thread. He swung faster than he ever had, covering blocks in seconds, but he was too far away. The bullet had already been fired. Aunt May, who had been walking just behind Mary Jane, saw the glint of the scope, saw the angle of the shot, and in a moment of pure instinct, she pushed Mary Jane aside. The bullet that was meant for Peter's wife struck his aunt instead, piercing through her shoulder and into her chest cavity. Peter arrived to find Aunt May bleeding on the sidewalk, Mary Jane screaming for help, pedestrians calling ambulances. He held May in his arms, applied pressure to the wound, begged her to hold on. Her eyes were unfocused, her breathing shallow, her skin pale from blood loss. "Peter," she whispered, "I always knew about Spider-Man. I've known for years. Don't talk, May, save your strength. I'm proud of you, so proud. You're the best thing that ever happened to me and Ben." Then she lost consciousness, and the ambulance arrived, and Peter watched them load her onto a stretcher with the terrible certainty that she was dying because of him. Because he had revealed his identity. Because he had been selfish enough to think he could live without a secret. The hospital became Peter's entire world. Aunt May was in critical condition, the bullet having damaged vital organs. The doctors said her age worked against her, that her body couldn't handle the trauma, that she might not survive the surgery. Peter paced the waiting room, unable to sit, unable to think about anything except the woman who had raised him dying because he hadn't been fast enough. Mary Jane held his hand, but she was shaking too. She had been the target. The bullet was meant for her. May took it instead, chose to protect her, and now both Peter and Mary Jane carried the guilt of that sacrifice. The surgery lasted 8 hours. When the doctor finally emerged, his expression told Peter everything before the words came. "We did everything we could. The damage was extensive. Even if she survives the night, the prognosis is poor. I'm sorry, Mr. Parker. You should prepare for the worst." Peter stood at May's bedside, watching her breathe through a ventilator, machines keeping her alive when her body wanted to shut down. This was his fault. His choice to unmask. His pride in thinking he could be both Peter Parker and Spider-Man publicly. His arrogance in believing Tony Stark's resources could protect everyone. Uncle Ben had died because of Peter's inaction. Now Aunt May was dying because of his action. Either way, Peter destroyed the people he loved. He tried everything. Called every superhero with medical knowledge, every scientist who might have a solution. Dr. Strange examined May, but said her injuries were beyond magic's reach. Reed Richards analyzed her condition, but had no technology that could repair the damage. Even Tony Stark, with all his resources and guilt over pushing Peter to unmask, could only offer condolences and expensive medical care that wasn't working. Days passed. May's condition deteriorated. The doctors said it was a matter of time now, hours maybe, before her organs failed completely. Peter sat beside her bed, holding her hand, watching the woman who had been his mother die slowly while he was powerless to stop it. Then, on the third night, when Peter was alone in May's room, something impossible happened. A figure materialized from shadows that shouldn't exist in a brightly lit hospital room. A man, if you could call him that, wearing an immaculate suit, his features shifting slightly as if reality couldn't quite decide what he looked like. "Peter Parker," the figure said, his voice smooth and ancient. "I've been waiting for this moment." Peter's spider sense didn't trigger. This thing, whatever it was, didn't register as a physical threat, but every instinct Peter had screamed danger anyway. "Who are you?" "I have many names. Mephisto is the one you would recognize. I'm here to offer you a deal." Mephisto. Peter knew the name from his readings on mysticism, from conversations with Dr. Strange. A demon, or something close enough that the distinction didn't matter. A being of immense power who trafficked in souls and deals and prices that couldn't be paid. "I don't make deals with demons. Not even to save her," Mephisto gestured to Aunt May. "I can heal her completely. She'll wake up tomorrow healthy and whole as if the bullet never touched her. The doctors will call it a miracle. You'll call it salvation." "What's the price?" "Your marriage." Peter's blood turned to ice. "What?" "You and Mary Jane Watson. Your marriage, your bond, the love you share. I want it." In exchange, I'll save May Parker's life and erase public knowledge of your secret identity. The world will forget Peter Parker is Spider-Man. You'll have your life back, your anonymity, your protection. That's insane. Why would you want that? Mephisto smiled, and there was something ancient and cruel in that expression. Love is the most powerful force in any universe. True love, rare and precious, has value beyond anything you can imagine. Yours and Mary Jane's, forged through tragedy and loss, tempered by suffering, that's worth more than 1,000 ordinary souls. No, Peter's voice was firm. I won't sacrifice my marriage. There has to be another way. There isn't. This is the only offer. Save May or keep Mary Jane. You can't have both. Mephisto disappeared, leaving Peter alone with an impossible choice. Save the woman who raised him or preserve the marriage he had fought so hard to build. Choose family or choose love. Choose the past or choose the future. Peter refused to choose. For days he searched for alternatives, called in every favor, consulted with every magical expert he knew. Dr. Strange said Mephisto's power was real, that he could indeed heal May and alter reality as promised. But he also warned that deals with Mephisto never ended well, that there was always a hidden cost, something you didn't see until it was too late. If you make this deal, Strange said carefully, you'll regret it. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. Mephisto doesn't offer bargains out of kindness. He's taking something from you that you don't even realize you're losing. But May was dying. The doctors had given up. They were discussing when to remove life support, when to let her go peacefully. And Peter couldn't do it. Couldn't sign the papers that would end her life. Couldn't watch another person die because he wasn't strong enough to save them. Mary Jane found him in May's room at 3 in the morning, staring at the machines keeping her alive. She sat beside him, took his hand, and waited for him to speak. Mephisto offered a deal, Peter finally said. He'll save May. But the cost is our marriage. Mary Jane was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was steady. What did you tell him? No, I told him no, I won't sacrifice what we have. Peter, she's dying. I know. But I can't lose you. I've lost everyone else. Uncle Ben, Gwen, my parents, Ben, Riley, everything. You're the one thing that kept me sane through all of it. If I give that up, what's left? Mary Jane stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Do you remember what you told me after Gwen died? You said with great power comes great responsibility, that it meant making impossible choices, bearing weights no one else could carry. This is different. How? She turned to face him, tears streaming down her face. May raised you. She loved you when no one else did. She took a bullet meant for me, Peter. She's dying because of us, because of Spider-Man, because of choices we made. And now you have the power to save her, but you won't because it costs too much. It costs us, our marriage, our love, everything we are. I know, Mary Jane's voice broke. And I'm asking you to make the deal anyway. Peter stood, moved toward her. MJ, no, I can't do that to you. You're not doing it to me. I'm choosing it. I'm choosing to save May because that's what she would want. Because keeping me alive while she dies would destroy you, Peter. You'd never forgive yourself. And I couldn't live knowing my existence cost hers. We'll forget. Mephisto said we'd forget ever being married. No, we won't, not completely. Love like ours doesn't just disappear because a demon snaps his fingers. It'll be there, Peter, in the spaces between words, in the way we look at each other. We'll know something's missing, even if we can't remember what. Then how is that better? Mary Jane crossed the room and cupped his face in her hands. Because May lives, because you don't have to bury another person you love, because maybe somehow we find our way back to each other. And if we don't, if this is really goodbye, then at least we're choosing it together. She kissed him then, and it tasted like salt and grief and endings. When she pulled away, she whispered against his lips. Make the deal, Peter. Save May. Let me do this one good thing before whatever we have disappears. Mephisto appeared as if summoned by Mary Jane's words. He looked at them both, at their joined hands, at the love that was about to be erased, and his smile was satisfied. You've made your choice. We have conditions, Mary Jane said firmly. You save May completely. No lingering damage, no hidden costs, and you erase public knowledge of Peter's identity. Everyone forgets Spider-Man is Peter Parker. The world resets to before the unmasking. Agreed. And in exchange, your marriage will have never happened. You'll have dated, been close, but never married. The history will rewrite itself. Only you two will remember what was lost. Peter looked at Mary Jane one last time. I love you. I will always love you. I know, Tiger, that's why this works, that's why it matters. Then Mephisto raised his hand and reality shifted. Peter woke up in his apartment, but it was different, smaller, no signs of Mary Jane's presence. He looked at his left hand and saw no wedding ring, just pale skin where the band should have been. But he remembered the wedding, the years together, the choice they made. The memory was there, complete and whole, but the reality had changed around it. His phone rang. The hospital. Peter's heart seized until he heard the doctor's voice, confused and excited. "Mr. Parker, I don't understand it, but your aunt is awake. Her vitals are normal. The injuries are healed. It's like the shooting never happened. We're calling it a miracle." Peter went to the hospital and found Aunt May sitting up in bed, looking healthy and confused about why she was there. She didn't remember being shot, didn't remember dying. For her, the nightmare had never happened. She was just May Parker, wondering why her nephew looked at her like she had returned from the dead. Over the following days, Peter discovered the full scope of what Mephisto had done. Public records showed no press conference where Spider-Man unmasked. News articles about Peter Parker being Spider-Man didn't exist. Jonah Jameson still bought his photos but had no idea Peter was the web slinger. The entire unmasking had been erased from history, but Peter remembered. And more importantly, Mary Jane remembered. They saw each other at a party. She looked at him and he saw the recognition in her eyes. The knowledge of what they had lost, what they had sacrificed, what they once were. They talked, and it was comfortable, familiar, like slipping into a well-worn jacket. But there was pain, too, the phantom ache of a marriage that never was, of a love that existed in their memories but nowhere else. "I remember," she told him quietly. "I remember everything. Me too. We can't go back, can we? Mephisto's deal, it doesn't just erase history, it changes us. Makes it so we never quite fit together the same way." Peter wanted to argue, wanted to say they could rebuild what was lost. But he knew she was right. The deal had taken more than just their marriage. It had taken the possibility of their marriage. They were different people now, shaped by a history that no longer existed, carrying memories of a relationship that reality insisted never happened. Mary Jane dated other people. Peter tried to move on. They stayed in each other's lives, remained friends, but the distance was there. A gap where their marriage should have been, a void that nothing could fill. They would look at each other sometimes, and in those moments both remembered. Remembered the deal, the sacrifice, the love that had been strong enough to trade for a life. Peter threw himself into being Spider-Man with renewed intensity. He had given up everything for a second chance, for May's life, for the ability to protect people without his identity endangering them. He wouldn't waste that sacrifice. Every criminal stopped, every life saved, every disaster prevented was justification for the cost he paid. But on quiet nights, alone in his apartment, Peter looked at his left hand and saw the ghost of a wedding ring that had never existed. He thought about Mary Jane, about the life they could have had, about the child they lost in another timeline that no one but them remembered. And he wondered if Mephisto's deal had really saved anything, or if it had just traded one kind of death for another. Aunt May was alive. Peter's secret was safe. But the cost was a marriage, a love, a piece of his soul that Mephisto took and would never return. And Peter would live with that absence for the rest of his life, carrying the memory of what he sacrificed, knowing it was necessary, understanding it was right, but never quite accepting that it was worth it. Some prices are too high, even when paying them is the only choice. Some deals save lives but cost souls. Some sacrifices are heroic and devastating in equal measure. Peter Parker had made the ultimate choice. Saved his aunt at the cost of his marriage. Preserved life by trading love. And he would carry that weight forever, another ghost added to the collection he already bore. Another reminder that being Spider-Man meant losing everything, piece by piece, until nothing remained but the responsibility and the web and the endless fight. The deal was made, the price was paid, and Peter Parker, Spider-Man, hero of New York, kept swinging into the night. Because that's what he did, that's all he had left. The responsibility Uncle Ben taught him, the duty Gwen's death enforced, the sacrifice Mary Jane enabled. With great power comes great responsibility. And sometimes, responsibility means trading everything you love for everything you've lost. Sometimes being a hero means making deals with devils and living with the consequences. Sometimes the web holds, but what it's holding is empty. Saved but not whole. Alive but not living. Real but not right. And Spider-Man swings on because stopping would mean admitting the cost was too high. And Peter Parker can never admit that. Not to himself, not to anyone. The web holds, it has to, because if it doesn't, if it breaks, then everything he sacrificed was for nothing. So Peter keeps swinging, keeps fighting, keeps carrying the weight, and tries not to think about the wedding ring that never was, the marriage that existed only in memory, the love that was real enough to trade for a life but not real enough to keep. Mephisto won. That's the truth Peter won't acknowledge. The demon got exactly what he wanted, and Peter Parker, for all his power and responsibility, couldn't stop it, could only accept it and live with the consequences. The brand new day had dawned, and it was lonelier than any night had ever been. The years after Mephisto's deal were strange ones for Peter Parker. He lived in a reality that felt slightly wrong, like a photograph that had been retouched just enough that you couldn't quite identify what was different but knew something was off. He still loved Mary Jane, still felt the phantom weight of a wedding ring that had never existed, still carried memories of a marriage that reality insisted was impossible. But he moved forward because that's what Spider-Man did. Always forward, never stopping, because stopping meant confronting losses too painful to examine. Peter rebuilt his life piece by piece. He dated other people, though none of them fit quite right. He worked as a photographer, as a scientist, as whatever paid the bills that month. Aunt May was alive and healthy, unaware of the price Peter paid to save her. His secret identity was safe again, the burden of public exposure lifted. By all measures, Mephisto's deal had given him what he needed. But it never felt like a victory. It felt like survival, and survival was different from living. Then, in 2014, something impossible happened that would change Peter's understanding of his place in the universe forever. It started with a murder. Peter was investigating a crime scene where a man in a Spider-Man costume had been killed. But it wasn't Peter's costume. The design was similar but different, the colors slightly off, the spider symbol larger. The body itself was wrong too. Forensics showed genetic markers that were almost human but not quite, as if this person came from somewhere with slightly different evolutionary pressures. Before Peter could process what he was seeing, his spider sense exploded. He spun around to find himself face to face with another Spider-Man. This one was younger, maybe 16, with a costume that was red and black instead of red and blue. The kid pulled off his mask, revealing a face Peter had never seen before. African-American, terrified, clearly in over his head. "You're Spider-Man," the kid said. "The original, I'm Miles Morales, and we have a serious problem." Miles explained in rushed, panicked words. He came from another dimension, another reality where Peter Parker had died fighting the Green Goblin. Miles had been bitten by a spider similar to the one that gave Peter his powers, had become Spider-Man of his world, and now something was hunting spider people across all dimensions. Killing them, feeding on them. Creatures called inheritors who viewed anyone with spider powers as prey. "How many spider people are there?" Peter asked, his scientific mind struggling with the implications. "We don't know, hundreds maybe, thousands. Every reality where someone got spider powers, every universe where the story went differently. They're all real, Peter, all of them, and the inheritors are killing them one by one." Before Peter could respond, reality tore open. Literally. A portal of swirling energy appeared in the alley, and through it stepped more spider people. A woman in a white and pink costume who introduced herself as Spider-Gwen, Gwen Stacy from a world where she got the spider bite instead of Peter. A man in a dark Victorian costume called Spider-Man Noir, from a reality stuck in the 1930s. A cartoon pig named Peter Porker who insisted he was Spider-Ham and seemed to operate on different laws of physics entirely. Each one told the same story. The inheritors were hunting them, moving from dimension to dimension, tracking down anyone with spider powers, killing them to absorb their life force. And now they had found this dimension, found Peter Parker's reality, and were coming. The leader of the inheritors was named Morlun, and Peter knew that name. He had fought Morlun years ago, a vampire-like being who fed on totemic animal powers. Peter had barely survived that encounter, only driving Morlun off temporarily. Now Morlun had returned with his entire family, a clan of immortal predators who had been hunting spider people for generations across infinite realities. "Why didn't they kill me before?" Peter asked. "When Morlun first attacked, why didn't he finish me?" "Because you're special," said a new voice. An older Spider-Man emerged from the portal, this one with gray hair and a weathered face. "This dimension, your reality, it's the Nexus. The original, the prime universe where the spider totem first manifested. Morlun was testing you, seeing if you were strong enough to be the final meal. He wanted to save you for last." The older Spider-Man introduced himself as an alternate Peter Parker from a future timeline. He had been fighting the inheritors longer than anyone, had watched countless spider people die, and had been searching for a way to unite them all, to create an army strong enough to fight back. "We need you," he said to Peter. The prime Spider-Man, the one all the other realities are based on. If we're going to survive this, we need a leader. Someone who understands what it means to be Spider-Man better than anyone. Peter looked at the assembled Spider-People, at these reflections of himself from across the multiverse, and felt the weight of responsibility multiply exponentially. It wasn't just his dimension anymore. It was all of them. Every reality where someone put on the mask, where someone chose responsibility over safety, where someone became Spider-Man. They were all his responsibility now. Over the following weeks, Peter traveled between dimensions he never knew existed. He met Spider-People of every variation imaginable. Jessica Drew, Spider-Woman from his own dimension who he had worked with before. Miguel O'Hara, Spider-Man 2099 from a cyberpunk future. Penny Parker, a young girl who piloted a psychic spider robot. Countless others, each with their own origin story, their own tragedies, their own Uncle Bens who taught them about power and responsibility. And in every single reality, the lesson was the same. Spider-Man's story always began with loss. Someone always died to teach them about responsibility. The details changed, but the core remained constant. Uncle Ben, Captain Stacy, Miles's Uncle Aaron, Gwen's father, variations on a theme that repeated across infinite realities. Peter realized something profound in those travels. His suffering wasn't unique, it was universal. Every Spider-Person carried the same weight, bore the same guilt, fought the same endless battle. But so was his strength. If the loss was universal, so was the choice to keep fighting despite it. Every Spider-Man in every reality chose to be a hero, chose responsibility over comfort, chose to swing into danger knowing they might not swing back out. The revelation was both devastating and empowering. Peter had spent years feeling alone, isolated by a burden no one else could understand. But he wasn't alone. He had never been alone. Across infinite realities, countless versions of his story were playing out, and every single one of them made the same choice he did. To be Spider-Man, to bear the weight, to keep going. The inheritors attacked in force. Morlun led his family through dimensions, hunting the Spider Army systematically. They were faster, stronger, nearly immortal. Each inheritor could kill multiple Spider-People before being slowed down. The battles were brutal. Peter watched Spider-People die, saw versions of himself and others fall to the inheritors' relentless assault. But the Spider Army fought back. They learned the inheritors' weaknesses, discovered their reliance on cloning technology for resurrection, found ways to trap them between dimensions. Peter coordinated the defense, using his scientific knowledge and years of experience to outthink enemies who were physically superior. During one battle, Peter faced Morlun directly. The vampire-like inheritor smiled at him with predatory anticipation. "You're the Prime," Morlun said. "The first, the original. Your life force will sustain me for decades. Then come and take it." They fought across a crumbling dimension, reality itself breaking down around them. Morlun was stronger, faster, more experienced. But Peter had something Morlun didn't. He had fought this battle 1,000 times in 1,000 different ways. He had lost everything and kept fighting. He had made impossible choices and lived with the consequences. He was Spider-Man not because of the powers, but because of the responsibility. Peter didn't defeat Morlun through strength. He defeated him through strategy, luring him into a trap prepared by the other Spider-People, using dimensional technology to cage him in a reality without exit. Morlun screamed as he was locked away, and Peter felt no satisfaction in the victory. Only exhaustion and the knowledge that more battles would come. The inheritors were defeated, scattered across dimensions, trapped or killed. The Spider Army had won, but the cost was staggering. Dozens of Spider-People dead. Entire realities left without their protectors. Peter returned to his dimension carrying the weight of all those losses, all those versions of himself and others who had fallen. But he also carried something else. Hope, because he had seen proof that Spider-Man was more than just one person. It was an idea that transcended dimensions, a choice that echoed across realities. And as long as someone, somewhere, chose to put on the mask and be responsible, Spider-Man would never truly die. The multiverse adventure changed Peter fundamentally. He understood now that his story was part of something larger, that every choice he made rippled across dimensions in ways he couldn't predict. When he saved someone in his reality, he was honoring every Spider-Person who had made similar saves in theirs. When he failed, he was carrying forward the lessons that every Spider-Man learned through loss. Miles Morales stayed in Peter's dimension for a while, learning from the original, and Peter found himself in the strange position of being a mentor. He taught Miles about web swinging, about fighting, about the responsibility that came with the powers. But Miles taught Peter something too. He showed Peter that Spider-Man could be anyone, that the specifics of Peter Parker's story weren't what made him special. What made him special was the choice to be a hero despite the cost. "You're going to lose people," Peter told Miles during one late-night training session. "Everyone does. Everyone who puts on this mask watches someone they love die because they weren't fast enough or strong enough or smart enough. It's going to hurt more than anything you've ever felt." "So why do we keep doing it?" Miles asked. "Because if we don't, more people die. Because responsibility doesn't end when it gets hard. Because Uncle Ben was right. With great power comes great responsibility. And we have the power, Miles, so we have the responsibility, all of it. Forever." Miles nodded, understanding in a way only another Spider-Man could. They were part of a legacy now, a chain of responsibility stretching across time and space and dimensions. Every Spider-Man teaching the next, every loss creating another hero, every tragedy forging another protector. But Peter's personal trials weren't over. While he was dealing with the multiverse, his own life continued to complicate in ways he couldn't control. Dr. Octopus was dying. Years of battles with Spider-Man, years of physical trauma from his mechanical arms, years of radiation exposure had finally caught up with Otto Octavius. His body was shutting down, and his brilliant mind refused to accept the injustice of it. He deserved more time, more opportunities to prove his genius, more chances to show the world what he was capable of. So Otto devised a plan of terrible elegance. Using technology he had been developing for years, he would swap minds with Spider-Man. Take Peter Parker's young, healthy body and leave Peter to die in Otto's decrepit form. Otto would get a second chance at life, and Peter Parker would simply cease to exist. The mind swap happened during a battle. One moment Peter was fighting Doc Ock, the next he was looking at his own body from outside it. He was in Otto's dying form, feeling the pain of organs failing, while Otto stood in Peter's body with a look of triumph. "Thank you, Parker," Otto said with Peter's voice. "Your body will serve me well, and you'll die within hours. Enjoy your remaining time." Peter, trapped in Otto's body, frantically tried to reverse the process. But Otto had destroyed the equipment, covered his tracks. Peter's friends and family saw Otto in Peter's body and believed it was Peter. Otto had access to Peter's memories, could mimic his speech patterns, could pass as Peter Parker well enough that no one suspected. The horror of it was complete. Peter would die anonymously in Otto's body, and Otto would steal his entire life. His identity, his relationships, his role as Spider-Man. Everything Peter had built, everything he was, would belong to his greatest enemy. Peter tried to reach out to the Avengers, to anyone who might help. But who would believe that the mind in Otto Octavius's dying body was actually Peter Parker? It sounded insane, impossible. And Otto had planned for every contingency, blocked every avenue of escape. In the end, Peter's body gave out. Otto Octavius's diseased organs failed completely, and Peter Parker, the original Spider-Man, died in a hospital bed wearing his enemy's face. No fanfare, no heroic last stand, just quiet suffocation as his lungs stopped working. But death wasn't the end. In his final moments, Peter managed one last trick. His consciousness, his memories, his sense of self, he embedded them in Otto's mind. A ghost in the machine. Peter Parker died, but a piece of him survived, hiding in the subconscious of the man who stole his body. Otto Octavius became Spider-Man. He wore the costume, fought crime, protected the city. But he did it his way. More brutal, more efficient, more ruthless. He called himself the superior Spider-Man, convinced he could be a better hero than Peter ever was. And in some ways, he was right. Otto's genius allowed him to develop technology Peter never dreamed of. His ruthlessness made criminals fear Spider-Man in ways they never had before. But Otto lacked Peter's heart. He killed criminals when Peter would have restrained them. He installed spy networks across the city, invading privacy to predict crimes before they happened. He was more effective but less heroic, and the distinction mattered. Peter's ghost watched from inside Otto's mind, unable to control the body, unable to stop what was happening to his identity. He watched Otto make mistake after mistake, watched him hurt people Peter cared about, watched him be Spider-Man wrong. The breaking point came when Otto faced a threat he couldn't handle alone. The Green Goblin had returned, and this version was more dangerous than any before. Otto, for all his genius and superiority complex, wasn't ready. He had Peter's powers and memories, but he didn't have Peter's experience, Peter's instinct, Peter's understanding of what it truly meant to be Spider-Man. As Otto fought the goblin and slowly lost, Peter's consciousness emerged fully. He forced Otto to confront the truth. Being Spider-Man wasn't about efficiency or superiority. It was about responsibility, about sacrifice, about making the hard choices and living with the consequences. All the things Otto had never understood. In the end, Otto made a choice that shocked Peter completely. He reversed the mind swap, gave Peter back his body, his life, his identity. Otto Octavius died for real this time. Not in his own body, but in Peter's mind, choosing to sacrifice himself so the truly superior hero, could return. "You were always better than me, Parker," Otto's consciousness said as it faded. "Not smarter, not more efficient, but better where it mattered. I tried to be Spider-Man, but Spider-Man was always you." Then Otto was gone, and Peter Parker was back in his own body, alive again through impossible circumstances. He looked at the city he had sworn to protect, at the costume he had worn for so many years, and felt the full weight of his identity return. He was Spider-Man, always had been, always would be. Through clones and deals with devils and mind swaps and multiversal wars, that core identity remained. Not because of the powers, but because of the choice. The choice to be responsible. The choice to protect people. The choice to be a hero even when being a hero cost everything. Peter swung through New York with renewed purpose. He had died and returned, had seen infinite versions of himself across realities, had lost his body and reclaimed it. And through all of it, one truth remained constant. With great power comes great responsibility. And Peter Parker, Spider-Man, the Prime, the original, the one who started it all, carried that responsibility across dimensions, across lifetimes, across deaths and resurrections and impossible circumstances. The web held because Peter Parker refused to let it break. And as long as he drew breath, as long as he could swing, as long as he could fight, the web would hold. Because that's what Spider-Man did. No matter what, no matter the cost. No matter the pain, the web held. It had to. Because if it didn't, then none of the sacrifices mattered. None of the losses had meaning. None of the responsibilities could be met. So Peter kept swinging, kept fighting, kept being Spider-Man. Because across infinite realities, in countless dimensions, the story was always the same. Spider-Man never quit, never stopped, never gave up. And Peter Parker, the original, the one who started it all, would be damned if he was the first to break that pattern. The web held, the responsibility remained, and Spider-Man swung on into the endless night. Peter Parker stood on a rooftop overlooking Manhattan. The city stretched out beneath him like a living organism of light and shadow. He was 33 years old, though he felt ancient. The years since his return from Otto's mind swap had been relentless, a cascade of battles and losses that seemed designed to test exactly how much one person could endure before breaking completely. The world had changed around him. New heroes emerged, younger and more optimistic than Peter could remember being. Miles Morales had fully embraced his role as Spider-Man, operating alongside Peter rather than in his shadow. Other spider-powered individuals had appeared, each with their own stories, their own tragedies. The spider totem that had chosen Peter decades ago seemed to be proliferating, creating a family of web-slingers across New York. But with that family came new responsibilities. Peter wasn't just protecting the city anymore. He was mentoring, guiding, trying to help younger heroes avoid the mistakes he had made. The weight multiplied with each new spider-person who looked to him for leadership. Then Norman Osborn returned, and Peter realized the nightmare would never truly end. Norman had survived his impalement on the glider years ago, his enhanced physiology keeping him alive through injuries that should have been fatal. He had spent years in hiding, plotting, preparing, allowing Peter to believe he was finally free of the Green Goblin. But Norman's obsession with destroying Spider-Man hadn't diminished. If anything, it had grown stronger, more focused, more dangerous. This time, Norman bonded with the Carnage symbiote, creating something worse than either the Green Goblin or Carnage had been separately. The Red Goblin emerged, a fusion of Norman's intelligence and brutality with the symbiote's power and bloodlust. He was faster than Peter, stronger, nearly invulnerable, and completely insane. The Red Goblin's first act was to systematically attack everyone Peter cared about, not just to hurt them, but to destroy them completely. He bombed the Daily Bugle, nearly killing J. Jonah Jameson. He attacked Empire State University, where Peter sometimes taught, putting students in danger. He went after Aunt May again, forcing Peter to move her to protective custody. But the attack that devastated Peter came from an unexpected direction. Flash Thompson, Peter's former high school bully, who had become one of his closest friends, had been bonded to the Venom symbiote for years. Flash used the symbiote as a hero, became Agent Venom, served his country with distinction. The symbiote and Flash had developed a genuine partnership, a bond stronger than the usual host-symbiote relationship. The Red Goblin targeted Flash specifically, hunted him across the city, and when they finally fought, Norman tore the Venom symbiote from Flash's body and absorbed it into himself, becoming even more powerful. Flash, who had lost his legs in military service and relied on the symbiote for mobility, was left helpless. Peter arrived too late. He swung onto the scene to find Flash Thompson dying, the separation from Venom having caused catastrophic damage to his already wounded body. The man who had tormented Peter in high school, who had idolized Spider-Man not knowing they were the same person, who had become a true hero in his own right, was bleeding out in Peter's arms. "I'm sorry," Peter choked out, tears streaming behind his mask. "Flash, I'm so sorry. I should have been faster. I should have protected you." Flash smiled weakly, his face pale. "You kidding, Parker? I got to be like Spider-Man. Got to be a hero. That's more than most people get." He coughed, blood flecking his lips. "Tell everyone I went out swinging, okay? Tell them Agent Venom didn't quit. You're not going anywhere. Just hold on. Help is coming." "We both know that's not true." Flash's hand gripped Peter's costume weakly. "It was an honor, man, being your friend. Finally understanding what you carried all these years. You're the real deal, Peter, the genuine article. Don't you ever forget that." Then Flash Thompson died, his eyes going vacant, his body going still. Peter held him there in the wreckage, surrounded by sirens and smoke, and the ruins of another life lost to Spider-Man's. Enemies, the bully who became a friend, the fan who became a hero, gone because Peter wasn't fast enough, wasn't strong enough, wasn't good enough. The rage that filled Peter was different from anything he had felt before. Not the hot fury that consumed him when Gwen died. This was cold, calculated, absolute. The Red Goblin had taken too much, had killed too many people, had crossed too many lines, and Peter was done showing mercy. The final battle between Spider-Man and the Red Goblin lasted 3 days. They fought across the entire city, destroying buildings, endangering civilians, pushing each other to the absolute limits of their abilities. Norman had the power advantage, but Peter had experience and determination fueled by grief. Peter used every trick he had learned over decades of being Spider-Man. He exploited the symbiote's weakness to sonics, to fire, to specific frequencies that disrupted its molecular cohesion. He used Norman's arrogance against him, goaded him into making mistakes, turned the Red Goblin's strength into a liability. But it wasn't enough. Norman was too strong, too fast, too enhanced by the combination of Goblin formula and symbiote. Peter was losing, his body breaking under the relentless assault, his webs running out, his strength failing. Then Miles Morales arrived, along with Spider-Gwen and Silk and every other spider-powered hero in New York. They had been coordinating, waiting for the right moment to strike. Together, they attacked the Red Goblin simultaneously, overwhelming him with numbers and coordinated tactics. The symbiote was torn away from Norman piece by piece, weakened by combined sonic attacks and anti-symbiote weapons. Norman Osborn, finally separated from both the Carnage symbiote and the remnants of Venom, stood alone facing an army of spider people. Peter stepped forward, his fist clenched, ready to end this once and for all, to kill Norman Osborn and make sure he never hurt anyone again. Harry's father or not, some people were too dangerous to let live. But as Peter raised his fist, he saw Norman's face. Not the Goblin's twisted grin, but Norman himself. Old, tired, broken by years of insanity and violence. A man who had destroyed his own life and the lives of everyone around him, who had lost his son's love, who had become a monster chasing a vendetta he could no longer remember the origin of. Peter lowered his fist, not out of mercy, but out of understanding. Killing Norman wouldn't bring back Flash or Gwen or Captain Stacy or any of the others. It would just make Peter into something he couldn't come back from. Uncle Ben's lesson had been about responsibility, and part of that responsibility was not becoming the thing you fought against. "You don't get to die," Peter said quietly. "You get to live, in prison, powerless, watching the world move on without you. That's your punishment, Norman, irrelevance." Norman Osborn was taken into custody, locked in a facility designed to hold supercriminals, stripped of his enhancements and his legacy. Peter didn't feel victorious. He just felt empty. Another battle won at too high a cost, another name added to the memorial of people who died because they were connected to Spider-Man. The grief threatened to consume Peter. He attended Flash's funeral and stood in the back, not wanting to intrude on the family's mourning. But Flash's mother saw him, recognized him from photos Flash had shown her, and pulled Peter into a crushing embrace. "He talked about you constantly," she said through tears. "Said you were the best person he ever knew, that you taught him what real heroism looked like. Thank you for being his friend, Peter. Thank you for showing him how to be good." Peter broke down completely, sobbing in this woman's arms, mourning the friend he had gained after years of enmity. Flash Thompson deserved better than to die in a street fight. Deserved to live, to continue being Agent Venom, to have the life he had fought so hard to build. But Spider-Man's enemies didn't care about what people deserved. They only cared about hurting Peter in the most devastating ways possible. In the aftermath of the Red Goblin's defeat, Peter withdrew. Not from being Spider-Man, he could never do that, but from the emotional connections that kept getting people killed. He pushed away the other Spider people, told them he worked better alone. He stopped attending Avengers meetings, stopped socializing, stopped allowing himself any vulnerability that could be exploited. Mary Jane noticed. She always noticed. They had remained friends despite the phantom marriage that neither could quite acknowledge, despite the deal with Mephisto that haunted them both. She came to his apartment one evening, let herself in when he didn't answer, and found him sitting in the dark surrounded by photos of the dead. Uncle Ben, Gwen Stacy, Captain Stacy, Jean DeWolf, Flash Thompson, so many others. "You're building a shrine to guilt," she said softly. "Peter, this isn't healthy. They're dead because of me. They're dead because they knew Spider-Man. That's different. You didn't kill them. You tried to save them. Trying isn't enough. It's never enough." Peter looked at her with hollow eyes. "Everyone I love dies, MJ. Everyone. Maybe you were right to make that deal with Mephisto. Maybe staying away from me is what keeps you alive." Mary Jane sat beside him, took his hand in hers. "I'm still here. Aunt May is still here. Miles, Gwen, all the others, they're still here. You haven't lost everyone, Peter. You've saved far more people than you've lost, but you only remember the failures because they hurt more. They should hurt more. If they didn't, what would that make me? Human. It would make you human. Which, despite the spider bite and the web slinging and the literal decades of superheroism, you still are." They sat in silence for a long time, two people bound by memories of a marriage that never was, by a love that had been traded for a life, by shared understanding of costs too high and prices that had to be paid anyway. "I remember," Peter finally said, "the wedding, our life together, the baby we lost. I know Mephisto erased it, but I remember. I remember too. Was it worth it? Giving that up to save May?" Mary Jane considered the question carefully. "Ask me on my deathbed. Right now, I honestly don't know. We saved May, but we lost us. And I don't know if that trade was fair or wise or right. I just know we made it, and we have to live with it." Around this time, a new threat emerged that forced Peter to confront aspects of his past he had been avoiding. A villain calling himself Kindred began targeting Spider-Man with attacks that were more psychological than physical. Kindred knew Peter's secrets, his fears, his worst memories. He brought back dead villains as twisted puppets, forced Peter to fight reanimated versions of Mysterio and the Vulture and others, each one whispering accusations and truths that cut deeper than any physical wound. Kindred's true identity was Harry Osborn, or something wearing Harry's face. The full truth was complicated, involving deals with demons and resurrections and fractured souls. But the core of Kindred's vendetta was simple. Harry had never forgiven Peter for his father's sins, had blamed Spider-Man for Norman's descent into madness, and had become something monstrous in his pursuit of revenge. "You let him live," Kindred hissed during one confrontation. "My father, the Green Goblin, you knew what he was and you protected him to spare me. But your protection destroyed me anyway. I spent my life loving a monster because you were too afraid to tell me the truth." "I was trying to save you," Peter said desperately. "Harry, I was trying to protect you from the pain of knowing what Norman really was. You don't get to decide what pain I can handle. You don't get to make my choices for me." The battle with Kindred became a battle over Peter's fundamental approach to heroism. Did he have the right to keep secrets to protect people? Was his judgment sound enough to decide when truth was too painful to share? How many of his decisions, made with good intentions, had actually caused more harm than if he had been honest from the start? Peter was forced to confront the deal with Mephisto, the choice to give up his marriage to save Aunt May. Kindred revealed he knew about it, mocked Peter for trading love for life, accused him of playing God with other people's existences. "You erased your own marriage," Kindred said with cruel satisfaction. Rewrote reality to save one life. What gives you that right, Peter? What makes you qualified to decide who lives and who dies, what relationships matter and which can be sacrificed? Peter had no answer. Because Kindred was right. The deal with Mephisto had been Peter choosing his own comfort, his inability to let May die, over the marriage he had built with Mary Jane. It had been selfish disguised as sacrifice, and the consequences rippled out in ways Peter still didn't fully understand. The resolution to the Kindred saga was messy, incomplete. Harry was saved, or at least the demon wearing his face was banished. But the accusations lingered. Peter was left questioning every major decision he had made, every sacrifice he had demanded from others, every choice that seemed right at the time but caused pain in retrospect. Through it all, one person remained constant: Aunt May. She had grown older, more fragile, but her spirit remained unbreakable. And finally, after decades of secrets and lies, she sat Peter down and spoke the words he had dreaded and longed for in equal measure. "I know you're Spider-Man, Peter. I've known for years, probably since you were in college. And I'm so proud of you, honey, so incredibly proud of the hero you've become." The relief of finally being known, fully known, by the woman who raised him was overwhelming. Peter had spent his entire adult life lying to May, protecting her from the truth, carrying the weight alone. And she had known all along, had let him keep his secret because she understood he needed the separation. "I let the burglar go," Peter confessed, the words finally escaping after decades of imprisonment. "The man who killed Uncle Ben, I could have stopped him, and I let him go because I was angry and selfish. If I had acted, Ben would still be alive." "I know," May said gently. "Ben knew too. He figured it out before he died, and he forgave you, Peter. It was an accident, a moment of anger, a kid making a bad choice. You spent your whole life trying to make up for it. But honey, you paid that debt decades ago. It's time to forgive yourself." "I don't know how." "Neither did Ben after his brother died. Neither did your father after he failed to save his partner. Neither do any of us when we make mistakes that cost lives. But we keep trying, Peter. We wake up every day and try to be better. That's all anyone can do. That's all Spider-Man ever needed to do." May's words didn't erase the guilt, but they softened it, made it bearable in ways it hadn't been before. Peter had been carrying Uncle Ben's death for over 20 years, using it as fuel and punishment in equal measure. Maybe it was time to carry it differently. Not as a wound that would never heal, but as a scar that reminded him why he made the choices he did. The most recent trials involved Peter's relationship with the broader superhero community. He had always been something of an outsider among the Avengers, the street-level hero trying to keep up with gods and super soldiers. But now, as threats grew larger and more cosmic, Peter found himself at the center of conflicts that stretched beyond New York, beyond Earth, beyond his ability to handle alone. He fought alongside the Avengers against threats he barely understood. Cosmic entities, reality warpers, forces that made his rogues gallery look quaint by comparison. And through it all, Peter maintained his core identity. He was still the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, still making jokes in the face of apocalypse, still trying to save everyone even when everyone included planets and dimensions. But the scale of the threats took a psychological toll. Peter had built his identity around protecting individual people, stopping muggers and bank robbers and supervillains who threatened his city. When the threats became abstract, when he was fighting to prevent concepts like the heat death of the universe or timeline collapse, he struggled to connect his actions to their consequences. He couldn't see the faces of the people he saved when he was preventing reality from unraveling. Couldn't hear their thanks or see them go home to their families. It made the heroism feel hollow, mechanical. Peter started to question whether he was still being Spider-Man, or if he had become something else entirely. Whether the boy who fought to protect his neighborhood had been lost somewhere along the way, replaced by someone who fought cosmic battles out of obligation rather than genuine desire to help. Mary Jane, in one of their increasingly rare conversations, asked him the question that cut to the heart of his crisis. "Why do you still do this, Peter? What keeps you putting on the mask when you've lost so much and gained so little?" Peter thought about it for a long time before answering. "Because if I stop, who does it become? If Spider-Man quits, does someone else pick up the responsibility? Or does it just fall away and people die because I was too tired to keep going?" That's not an answer. That's just more guilt. Maybe guilt is all I have left. Maybe that's enough. It's not enough. It's never been enough. You need something more than guilt and responsibility to sustain you, Peter. You need hope, purpose. Something that makes the fight worth fighting beyond just duty. She was right, and Peter knew it. But he didn't know how to find that hope anymore. Didn't know where to look for purpose when everything he built kept getting torn down. Didn't know how to believe the fight was worth fighting when the cost kept rising and the victories felt increasingly Pyrrhic. But he kept going anyway, because that's what Spider-Man did. Keep going, keep swinging, keep fighting. Even when you didn't know why anymore. Even when the weight was crushing. Even when every reason to stop seemed more valid than any reason to continue. Peter Parker stood on that rooftop, looking at the city he had protected for over 2 decades, and made a choice. Not to quit, not to give up, not to let the weight finally crush him, but to keep going one more day, save one more person, stop one more crime, because maybe that was enough. Maybe the small victories mattered more than the cosmic ones. Maybe the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man was more important than the Avenger who saved reality. Maybe Peter Parker, broken and scarred, and carrying more ghosts than any one person should, was exactly the hero New York needed. Not because he was perfect, but because he kept trying despite being so imperfect. The web held. It always held, because Peter Parker refused to let it break, and tomorrow he would wake up and do it all again. Because with great power came great responsibility. And Peter Parker, for all his flaws and failures and losses, was nothing if not responsible. The night called, the city needed protection, and Spider-Man answered, always, without fail, until the day he couldn't anymore. But that day wasn't today. Today, Spider-Man swung into the darkness, carrying his dead with him, and tried to believe it still mattered. It had to matter. Because if it didn't, then all the sacrifices were for nothing. And Peter Parker couldn't accept that. So he kept swinging, kept fighting, kept being Spider-Man, one more day, one more night, one more chance to save someone. That was enough. It had to be enough. The web held. Peter Parker sits alone in his apartment, the same one he's lived in for years, small and cramped and filled with memories both real and phantom. Rain streaks down the window, distorting the city lights into abstract patterns that blur and shift like his own fractured history. In his hands, worn smooth from decades of being held just like this, is the photograph of Uncle Ben. That same image that started this entire journey, that same smile that haunts every choice Peter has ever made. But tonight, something is different. Tonight, Peter isn't drowning in the memory. He's examining it with the clarity that only comes after carrying a weight for so long that you finally understand its true shape. The photograph shows Uncle Ben at a barbecue, probably taken just weeks before his death. He's laughing at something off camera, his face creased with genuine joy, his eyes bright with the simple pleasure of being alive. Peter tries to remember what the joke was, what had made Ben laugh that day, but the detail is lost to time. What remains is the feeling, the warmth, the safety of being loved by someone who expected nothing in return except that you try to be good. Peter sets the photograph down carefully and walks to his closet. The Spider-Man costume hangs there, the same basic design he's worn for over 20 years, though this particular suit has been repaired and modified countless times. Patches cover tears from Morland's claws. Reinforced webbing across the chest where the Green Goblin's bomb nearly killed him. Burns from Electro. Scorch marks from battles he can barely remember. The costume isn't just fabric and spandex anymore. It's a tapestry of his life, every scar a story, every repair a testament to survival. He traces his finger along a particularly nasty tear near the shoulder, remembering the fight with Kraven that nearly ended him. Remembering how Kraven had been inches from delivering the killing blow when Peter's spider sense screamed, and he rolled aside just in time. How many times had that happened? How many moments existed where Peter should have died but didn't, where random chance or desperate luck or sheer stubborn refusal to quit had kept him alive? Hundreds, thousands maybe, each one a moment where the story could have ended, where Spider-Man could have fallen and stayed down. But he never did. Even when dying seemed easier than continuing, even when every rational part of his mind screamed that it was time to stop, Peter got back up. Why, the question has haunted him for years. Why does Peter Parker keep being Spider-Man? It can't just be guilt anymore. Guilt fades with time, gets processed, becomes manageable. It can't just be responsibility, because responsibility without purpose is just obligation, and obligation eventually breaks everyone who carries it too long. So why? Peter looks at his reflection in the darkened window and sees a man in his late 30s who looks older. Gray starting to thread through his hair, lines around his eyes from squinting through masks and eyepieces for decades. Scars hidden beneath his clothes, some from battles, some from simply being human and getting hurt in mundane ways. He's not the 15-year-old kid who got bitten by a radioactive spider anymore. That boy died years ago, killed by grief and loss and the weight of impossible choices. But someone is still here. Someone still puts on the mask. Someone still swings into the night. Who is that person, really? The memories cascade through his mind, not in the traumatic flashbacks that used to paralyze him, but in a steady stream of moments that define his existence. Uncle Ben's death, yes, but also the first time Peter saved someone from a burning building and heard them thank him with tears in their eyes. Gwen's fall, yes, but also the way she smiled at him over coffee and made him believe he deserved happiness. The deal with Mephisto, yes, but also the reason he made it, the love that was strong enough to sacrifice itself. Every loss Peter has suffered has a counterweight. For every person who died, there are dozens he saved. For every failure that haunts him, there are successes he barely remembers because they felt like just doing his job. For every moment of despair, there have been moments of connection, of purpose, of understanding that what he does matters in ways both cosmic and intimate. Peter thinks about the Spider-Verse, about meeting all those alternate versions of himself from across infinite realities. Every single one of them had experienced loss. Every Spider-Person had their Uncle Ben, their Gwen Stacy, their fundamental tragedy that taught them about power and responsibility. But every single one of them also chose to keep going. Chose to be heroes not because they were forced to, but because they understood something fundamental about the nature of power. Power isn't just the ability to do things. It's the capability to make choices that others can't make. Peter got spider powers, yes, but billions of people have capabilities they don't use for good. Wealth is a power, and most wealthy people hoard it. Intelligence is a power, and most intelligent people use it for personal gain. Physical strength is a power, and most strong people use it to dominate others. What makes Spider-Man special isn't the powers. It's the choice to use them responsibly, to see capability and ask not what can I get, but who can I help? That choice, repeated every day for over 2 decades, that's what being Spider-Man actually means. Peter picks up his phone and scrolls through messages. There's one from Miles Morales, checking in, asking if Peter wants to patrol together tonight. Another from Spider-Gwen, sharing a meme about web-slinging that's actually pretty funny. A text from Aunt May reminding him to come by for dinner this weekend, adding that she's making his favorite and won't take no for an answer. A missed call from Mary Jane, no voicemail, just her letting him know she's thinking about him. These people, this network of connections that Peter has built despite his best efforts to push everyone away for their own safety, they're still here. Still caring about him, still choosing to be in his life despite knowing the dangers, despite understanding the costs. Peter has spent so long focusing on who he's lost that he hasn't fully appreciated who remains. Aunt May is alive, healthy, knows his secret and loves him anyway. Mary Jane is alive, successful, still in his orbit even though Mephisto tried to erase their connection. Miles Morales exists, carries on the Spider-Man legacy, proves that Peter's influence extends beyond his own actions. An entire family of spider people exists because Peter inspired them, showed them what responsible heroism looked like. The web doesn't just catch people when they fall, it connects them. Every person Peter has saved is connected to everyone they love, who are connected to everyone they love, spreading out in patterns too complex to map. How many people are alive right now because Peter stopped a mugger who would have killed someone's father? How many children exist because Peter saved their parents from a fire before they were born? How many futures are possible because Spider-Man refused to quit? The math is impossible to calculate, but the truth is undeniable. Peter Parker has saved more lives than he's lost, has created more joy than pain, has been a net positive on the world despite the catastrophic costs he's personally paid. The guilt has made him forget this, made him focus on the failures because they hurt more. But Mary Jane was right. The successes matter too, even if they don't hurt enough to remember clearly. Peter walks to his window and opens it, letting the rain-scented air wash over him. The city stretches out before him, 8 million people living their lives, most of them completely unaware that Spider-Man exists. They don't know Peter Parker, don't know his sacrifices, don't know how many times he's saved them from threats they never saw coming. And that's fine. That's how it should be. Heroes don't do it for recognition. They do it because it needs doing and they have the power to do it. With great power comes great responsibility. Uncle Ben's words, the foundation of everything Peter became. But Peter understands now that the lesson wasn't complete. It wasn't just you have power, therefore you must act. It was deeper than that. It was you have power, which means you have choices others don't have, and how you make those choices defines who you are. Peter has made terrible choices. Let the burglar go, failed to save Gwen, made the deal with Mephisto. Let Norman live when he should have been stopped permanently. But he's also made incredible choices, devoted his life to helping others. Refused to kill even when killing would have been easier. Mentored younger heroes. Kept trying when quitting would have been justified. The bad choices don't erase the good ones, and the good choices don't excuse the bad ones. They exist together, a complete picture of a human being trying his best in impossible circumstances. Peter thinks about Ben Reilly, his clone, who died protecting him. Ben's last words echo across the years. "Thank you for letting me be Spider-Man." As if being Spider-Man was a gift, a privilege, something to be grateful for rather than a burden to be endured. Maybe Ben understood something Peter has been too broken to see. Maybe being Spider-Man isn't punishment for failing Uncle Ben. Maybe it's the opportunity to honor him, to prove that his lessons mattered, that his faith in Peter wasn't misplaced. Uncle Ben believed Peter would do something extraordinary with his life. Not because of spider powers he didn't know about, but because of who Peter was as a person. Smart, kind, empathetic, driven by a desire to help others even before the radioactive spider bit him. The powers just gave Peter the capability to act on impulses he already had. They amplified who he was, didn't create it. Which means Spider-Man isn't separate from Peter Parker. They're the same person, the same core identity expressed through different methods. Peter Parker helps people by being a good friend, a caring nephew, a dedicated scientist. Spider-Man helps people by stopping criminals and preventing disasters. But the fundamental drive is identical. See someone in need and do what you can to help. That's Peter Parker, that's Spider-Man. That's who he's always been. From the moment Uncle Ben and Aunt May took in an orphaned 6-year-old and showed him what love looked like. Peter pulls on the Spider-Man costume, feeling the familiar weight of it settle over his body. He's done this thousands of times, the ritual so ingrained that his hands move without conscious thought. But tonight it feels different. Not lighter exactly. The weight is still there, the responsibility still crushes, the memories still hurt. But he's carrying it differently now. Not as punishment, but as purpose. Not as obligation, but as choice. He's choosing this, choosing to be Spider-Man, not because Uncle Ben's death demands it, though that's part of it. Not because Gwen's fall requires eternal penance, though he'll never stop grieving her. Not because the world needs heroes, though it does. He's choosing it because this is who Peter Parker is. This is what he does. This is the life he's built from tragedy and determination, and the stubborn refusal to let the bad guys win. Before he leaves, Peter takes one more look at Uncle Ben's photograph. He's looked at this image in grief, in guilt, in desperation, in rage. Tonight he looks at it in understanding. Uncle Ben is smiling because he was happy. Because despite the hardships of his life, despite never being wealthy or famous or conventionally successful, he had a good life. He had May, he had Peter. He had purpose and meaning and love. And when he died doing the right thing, protecting others, standing up to evil, making the choice his power gave him the ability to make. Uncle Ben would have been Spider-Man if he had gotten the powers. Peter knows this now. The lesson about power and responsibility wasn't something Ben made up after the fact. It was how. He lived his entire life. Work hard, be kind, help others, do what's right even when it's difficult. Ben was teaching Peter how to be a hero years before Peter had any powers to be heroic with. The spider bite just gave Peter the opportunity to express those lessons on a larger scale. "I understand now," Peter says quietly to the photograph. "It's not about making up for letting him go. It's about honoring what you taught me. About being the person you believed I could be. I've been so focused on the failure that I forgot the lesson. With great power comes great responsibility. But power isn't just spider strength and wall crawling. It's intelligence, empathy, determination, the ability to get back up when everything says stay down. Those are powers too, and you taught me to use them responsibly. To help people. To be good, that's what Spider-Man really is. Not the costume or the webs. It's the choice to help made over and over again every single day." Peter opens the window fully and stands on the sill. The rain has stopped, leaving the city washed clean and glistening. Somewhere out there, someone needs help. Someone is in danger. Someone is falling and needs a web to catch them. That's always true in every moment in every city. The need never stops. The responsibility never ends. But that's okay, because Peter Parker doesn't want it to end. He's finally admitting what he's known deep down for years but was too traumatized to acknowledge. He likes being Spider-Man, not the injuries or the loss or the endless pain, but the actual work of it. The physics of web slinging through the city. The satisfaction of stopping a criminal before they hurt someone. The gratitude in a saved person's eyes. The knowledge that his existence makes the world measurably better. That's not punishment. That's fulfillment. Miles Morales appears, swinging through the city, his red and black costume a blur of motion. He lands on a building across from Peter and waves. Spider-Gwen arrives moments later, her white and pink costume ghostly in the city lights. Then Silk, then others, a full family of spider people gathering for a coordinated patrol. They're all here because Peter showed them the way, because his refusal to quit inspired them to try, because Spider-Man's web connects more than just buildings. Peter shoots a web line and swings out to join them. The familiar sensation of falling and catching himself, the rush of air, the controlled chaos of momentum and trajectory, it fills him with something he hasn't felt in years. Not happiness exactly, but contentment, purpose. The sense of being exactly where he's supposed to be, doing exactly what he's meant to do. They patrol together, this family of spider people, stopping crimes large and small. A mugging in an alley, a car accident that needs assistance, a fire where people are trapped. Every incident is a life saved, a tragedy prevented, a family that stays whole. And with every save, Peter feels the weight shift slightly, not disappearing but distributing. The responsibility isn't his alone anymore. He has help. He has family. The web is stronger than just one strand. Near midnight, Peter takes a break on the rooftop where this night started. The photograph of Uncle Ben is still in his apartment, still smiling, still waiting. But Peter doesn't need to look at it anymore. He carries Uncle Ben with him, in the choices he makes, in the lessons he applies, in the hero he's become. Not despite Uncle Ben's death, but because of the life Uncle Ben lived. Mary Jane texts him. Saw Spider-Man on the news, good work tonight, coffee tomorrow. Peter smiles behind his mask and texts back. Yeah, I'd like that. They're not married, thanks to Mephisto's deal, but they're not separated either. They're finding their way to whatever relationship they're supposed to have in this reality, and maybe that's enough. Maybe the love doesn't have to look like marriage to be real. Maybe choosing to stay in each other's lives despite everything is its own kind of commitment. Aunt May calls, even though it's late. I saw you on TV, dear. You saved that family from the fire. I'm so proud of you. Peter's throat tightens with emotion. She knows, she's always known, and she's proud. Not ashamed, not terrified, not resentful of the life he's chosen. Proud. Uncle Ben would have been proud too. That realization hits Peter with unexpected force. He's been so focused on failing Ben that he never considered Ben might be proud of who Peter became anyway. Might look at Spider-Man's decades of service and see not a perpetual penance for one mistake, but the fulfillment of a potential Ben always saw in him. Thanks, Aunt May, I love you. I love you too, Peter. Get some sleep tonight. Even Spider-Man needs rest. Peter swings home as dawn starts to break over the city. The sun rises behind the buildings, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. A new day beginning, full of possibilities and threats and moments where Peter will have to choose between what's easy and what's right. He'll choose right. He always does. Not perfectly, not without cost, but consistently. That's what makes him Spider-Man. Back in his apartment, Peter hangs up the costume and looks at himself in the mirror. Not Spider-Man now, just Peter Parker. But the distinction doesn't matter as much anymore. They're the same person. Always have been. The mask doesn't transform him into something else. It just allows him to express who he already is without endangering the people he loves. He lies down in bed, exhausted but satisfied. The ghosts are still there. Uncle Ben, Gwen, Flash, all the others who died because they were connected to Spider-Man. But they're not just ghosts anymore. They're reminders, motivation, proof that the stakes are real, that the responsibility matters, that every choice Peter makes has consequences for people he cares about. But they're also proof that he was loved. That people chose to be in his life despite the dangers. That his existence meant something to them, something worth the risk. Uncle Ben didn't have to raise Peter, but he did, and it cost him his life, and Peter is finally understanding that Ben would make the same choice again. Because love isn't about avoiding loss. It's about choosing connection even when connection means vulnerability. Gwen loved him knowing he was Spider-Man. Mary Jane married him knowing he was Spider-Man. Flash idolized him because he was Spider-Man. They all made informed choices to be in his life, understanding the risks, accepting the costs. Peter doesn't get to retroactively unmake those choices by swimming in guilt. He gets to honor them by being the person they believed in, by being the hero worth dying for, even though he would never ask anyone to make that sacrifice. Sleep comes easier than it has in years. No nightmares of falling bodies or laughing goblins. Just rest, deep and dreamless and necessary. When Peter wakes, the sun is high, and the city is alive with the sounds of 8 million people living their lives. Most of them will never need Spider-Man. Most will go about their day without encountering a single supervillain or catastrophic threat. That's success. That's what all the fighting is for. To maintain a world where normalcy is possible, where people can live and love and laugh without constant fear. Peter makes coffee and checks his phone. Messages from the Avengers about a meeting. An email from the university about a research position. A text from Miles asking for advice on a particularly difficult villain. The fabric of Peter's life, woven from superheroism and normalcy in equal measure. This is what balance looks like. Not perfect separation between identities, but integration. Being Peter Parker who is Spider-Man, not Peter Parker versus Spider-Man. He thinks about the title of this story, the one that's been running through his head all night. The truth in the web. What is that truth? What has Peter finally understood after decades of carrying responsibility like a cross? The truth is this. The web always catches you. Not always the way you want, not always without pain. Sometimes it catches you too late. Sometimes it can't stop the fall completely, but it catches you. The web of relationships, of choices, of responsibility and purpose and meaning. It's always there, connecting you to something larger than yourself, giving you reason to keep fighting even when fighting seems pointless. Peter was caught by Uncle Ben and Aunt May when his parents died. Caught by Uncle Ben's lessons when grief threatened to drown him. Caught by the spider bite when he was directionless. Caught by responsibility when he was selfish. Caught by Gwen's love when he was alone. Caught by Mary Jane's understanding when he was broken. Caught by the Spider-Verse when he thought his suffering was unique. Caught by mentorship when he thought he had nothing left to give. The web has always caught him. And in turn, Peter has spent his life being the web that catches others. Every person saved is caught by Spider-Man's web, literally and metaphorically. Given a second chance, a moment of grace, an opportunity to continue their story because someone cared enough to swing into danger and catch them when they fell. That's the truth in the web. We're all falling. Life is gravity and entropy and loss. But we're also all capable of being caught and of catching others. Power, in whatever form it takes, is just the ability to be the web. To see someone falling and choose to catch them. To accept being caught when you fall. To recognize that we're all connected, all responsible for each other, all part of a pattern larger than any individual strand. Spider-Man isn't special because he has powers. He's special because he uses them to be the web, to catch people, to connect them, to create a safety net that holds even when everything says it should break. Peter Parker is the web, always has been, from the moment he chose to honor Uncle Ben's death by helping others, from the moment he got back up after Gwen's fall, from the moment he made the deal with Mephisto and kept being a hero even after losing everything. From the moment he returned from Otto's mind swap and reclaimed his identity. Every time Peter should have broken, should have quit, should have let the web snap, he held on. He was the web that refused to break, and he'll keep being the web. Tomorrow and the day after and every day until he physically can't anymore. Because that's who Peter Parker is. That's what Spider-Man does. Be the web. Catch people. Connect them. Give them second chances, make the world measurably better through repeated small acts of heroism that add up to something extraordinary. The photograph of Uncle Ben sits on Peter's desk, that same smile, that same moment of joy. But Peter sees it differently now. Uncle Ben isn't just a reminder of failure, he's proof of success. Proof that one person's life can matter, can influence, can create ripples that spread across decades. Ben died, yes, but his lessons lived, his love lived, his faith in Peter lived. And because of that, thousands of people are alive who would have died without Spider-Man. Thousands of families are whole. Thousands of futures are possible. That's Uncle Ben's legacy, not his death, but the hero his death created. Not the tragedy, but the response to tragedy. Not the fall, but the web that caught Peter and transformed him into someone who catches others. Peter picks up the photograph one final time and speaks to it, not in grief or guilt, but in gratitude. Thank you, Uncle Ben, for teaching me about responsibility, for believing in me, for loving me enough to raise me when you didn't have to, for being the web that caught me when my parents died. I've been so focused on failing you that I forgot I've also been honoring you. Every person I save, every criminal I stop, every choice I make to help instead of harm, that's your lesson. That's your legacy. You died teaching me about power and responsibility. I've spent my life proving you were right to teach me. That's what Spider-Man is. Your lessons in action, and I'm finally okay with that. Finally understanding that being Spider-Man isn't punishment for letting your killer go. It's celebration of what you taught me. It's the best possible response to tragedy. It's proof that your death, as unfair and horrible as it was, created something good, created a hero, created someone who catches others the way you caught me. Peter sets the photograph down with a sense of closure he's never felt before. The guilt isn't gone, probably never will be completely. But it's different now, transformed from a weight that crushes into a foundation that supports. Uncle Ben's death is the reason Peter became Spider-Man, yes. But it's not the reason he stays Spider-Man. He stays because it's who he is, because the work matters, because people need help and he has the power to provide it, because the web holds and someone has to be the web. The city calls. It always calls. Somewhere out there, someone is falling. Somewhere a crime is being committed. Somewhere a person needs saving and doesn't know Spider-Man exists but will be grateful he does. Peter can hear the call, feel it in his spider sense, in his bones, in the core of who he is. The responsibility is there, constant and unending and somehow beautiful in its simplicity. Help people. Stop bad guys. Catch those who fall. Be the web, that's Spider-Man. That's Peter Parker. That's who he'll be until his last breath. And he's finally, after all these years, at peace with that. Peter pulls on the costume one more time, stands at his window, takes a deep breath of New York air, smoggy and alive and full of possibility. Then he jumps, shoots a web, and swings into the city he's protected for over 20 years. The web catches him. It always catches him. Because he is the web. Always has been. Always will be. And for tonight, for this moment, for however long his body and will allow, Peter Parker will be the web that catches others. We'll swing through the city looking for people who need saving. We'll stop criminals and prevent disasters and make the world incrementally better through accumulated acts of heroism. The sun sets behind him, painting the city in shades of red and gold. Spider-Man swings toward the darkness, toward danger, toward responsibility. And for the first time in longer than he can remember, Peter is smiling beneath the mask. Not because the burden is lighter, not because the cost is any less devastating, but because he finally understands the truth. The web holds. The responsibility matters. The sacrifice means something. Every person saved, every villain stopped, every choice to be heroic when being selfish would be easier, it all adds up. It creates a legacy. It makes a difference. It proves that Uncle Ben was right. With great power comes great responsibility. And Peter Parker has spent his entire adult life being responsible. Has caught thousands of people who were falling. Has been the web that holds when everything else breaks. That's not punishment. That's purpose. That's meaning. That's a life well lived, regardless of the cost. Spider-Man swings into the night, carrying his dead with him, honoring their memories by being the hero they believed he could be. Uncle Ben rides with him in every choice to help instead of harm. Gwen lives in every person he catches before they fall. Flash's sacrifice means something because Peter keeps fighting. The wedding that never was still exists in the determination to protect others the way he wanted to protect Mary Jane. Every loss, every ghost, every person he couldn't save drives him to save the next one. To be faster, smarter, better. To be Spider-Man. And somewhere across infinite realities, other Spider people are swinging too. Miles Morales in his dimension. Spider-Gwen in hers. Thousands of web-slingers, all carrying similar burdens, all making similar choices, all being the web that catches their worlds. Peter isn't alone. He's part of something larger. A legacy that transcends any individual. An idea that refuses to die no matter how many times reality tries to kill it. With great power comes great responsibility. The words echo across dimensions, across timelines, across every reality where someone got spider powers and chose to be a hero. Uncle Ben's lesson has become universal truth, carried forward by every spider person who refuses to quit despite the costs. The web holds, across infinite realities the web holds, because Spider-Man in all his variations chooses to be the web, chooses responsibility over comfort, chooses heroism over ease, chooses to catch people even when catching them hurts. Peter Parker swings through his city, protecting his people, being the hero Uncle Ben believed he could be, not perfect, not without scars, Not without ghosts and guilt and grief that will never fully fade, but present, trying, choosing to help every single day, being the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man who catches people when they fall, being the web that holds even when holding seems impossible. That's enough. That has to be enough. That is enough. The web holds, the responsibility continues, the hero persists. And New York, magnificent and messy and full of people worth saving, sleeps a little safer tonight because Peter Parker refuses to quit. Because Spider-Man never quits, never stops, never gives up. The web holds, always, forever, until the very last swing. And even then, even when Peter Parker's story finally ends, the web will hold. Because Spider-Man is bigger than any one person. It's an idea, a choice, a responsibility that passes to whoever is brave enough to accept it. The web holds. The web always holds, because someone somewhere chooses to be the web, to catch others, to be responsible, to be a hero. Tonight, that someone is Peter Parker. Tomorrow, it might be Miles Morales. The day after, Spider-Gwen, or someone else entirely in some other reality making the same choice Peter made decades ago. To honor their Uncle Ben, to use their power responsibly, to be Spider-Man. The story continues. The web holds. The responsibility never ends, and that's not a tragedy. That's hope. That's legacy. That's proof that heroism matters, that choices echo across time, that one person's decision to help instead of harm can change the world in ways both cosmic and intimate. Peter Parker swings into the darkness, and the city lights shine behind him like stars. The web catches him as he falls. It always catches him, because he is the web. And the web, despite everything, despite all the losses and pain and impossible costs, holds. It holds. It has to. Because if it doesn't, then everything Peter has sacrificed, everything he's lost, everything he's fought for, it would all be for nothing. And Peter Parker, Spider-Man, the boy who was taught about power and responsibility by the best man he ever knew, cannot accept that. So the web holds. Today, tomorrow, forever. As long as Spider-Man swings, the web holds. As long as Peter Parker breathes, the responsibility continues. As long as someone somewhere chooses heroism over comfort, the legacy lives on. The truth in the web is simple, devastating, and beautiful. We catch each other. We hold each other. We choose responsibility when power gives us the option to choose selfishness instead. That's what makes us human. That's what makes us heroes. That's what makes the pain worth bearing and the sacrifice worth making. The web holds, and Peter Parker, for all his flaws and failures and ghosts, is the web. Has always been the web, will always be the web until his last breath, until his final swing, until the moment he can no longer hold on. And even then the web will remain, because Spider-Man is eternal. The responsibility never dies. The choice to help echoes across infinite realities and can never be unmade. With great power comes great responsibility. Uncle Ben's words. Peter's truth, Spider-Man's legacy. The web holds, now and forever, because someone has to hold it. And Peter Parker, broken and scarred and still swinging, chooses to be that someone, every single day, without fail, without exception. Without end, the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, the web that catches the world, the hero who refuses to quit. That's Peter Parker, that's Spider-Man, that's the truth in the web. And tonight, like every night, the web holds strong. The city sleeps safe. And Spider-Man swings on, carrying his dead, honoring his living, being the hero Uncle Ben always knew he could be. Good night, New York. Good night, Peter Parker. Good night, Spider-Man. The web holds. It always holds. And tomorrow we begin again, because that's what heroes do. They begin again, always, forever, until the story ends, and maybe not even then. The web holds. That's the truth. That's the lesson. That's everything. The web holds because someone chooses to hold it. And Peter Parker will never stop making that choice. Never stop being the web. Never stop being Spider-Man. The web holds, now and always. The web holds.